I started 3 seconds early, just so you can look at her face. Just look at it. Look at it. Oh, I'm not making fun of the way she looks. I'm making fun of her demonic spirit. Just look at it for 3 more seconds before you hear the verbal diarrhea come out of that mouth. Oh, and by the way, wait for her smile to drop like the beat of a club song. Oh.
What do you make of your security detail arresting David Menzies?
So,
I already want to vomit.
I want to start with what was important about Monday.
U.S. Americans are having trouble finding.
What was important about Monday, January 8th,
Monday, January,
that
more
was
specific.
the 4th anniversary of a date that I think forever needs to be marked and circled in black on the calendar of all Canadians. It was a tragedy for Canada. Canadians were criminally murdered, and I want...
If this were a deposition and I were the lawyer, I would stop the witness right now and I said, I would have, and I've done this all the time, it's actually kind of a decent tactic. I say, stop. What was the question I just asked you? 9 out of 10 times, they, at this point into their idiotic rambling, will not even remember the question that was asked. What was the question that you were just asked, Madam Fräulein Freelander? What was it? Freeland, not Freelander. What do you say about your security detail falsely arresting and assaulting David Menzies? So let me just go on for a minute about exploiting and milking the victims of, call it a terrorist attack, or at the very least, the deliberate downing of a commercial airliner. Let me just go ahead and milk those victims to distract from the question, and then I'll get to your question soon.
I want to say to the families and loved ones of the people who were murdered that Canada remembers, Canada will not forget.
Canada remembers and Canada will not forget. And it took Justin Trudeau about a week to finally refer to it as a plane that was taken down and not a plane that crashed. At first he was saying it's a plane crash. Sorry, planes getting shot out of the sky is not a crash. It's a terrorist attack, more likely. Now she can admit it because now she gets the virtue points for invoking the victims of that downing of the, was it the Ukrainian flight or the Iranian flight? I forget. Now they can talk about it instead of answering the very straightforward question that she was asked to begin with.
And that's why I was in Richmond Hill. Marcy was there too, to show that this is a Canadian tragedy, that Canada remembers and Canada will not forget.
Canada remembers and Canada will not forget. All right, you're about as smart as Kamala Harris, Chrystia Freeland. By the way, we're now a minute into the question?
The incident, as you guys know very well, Canada is a rule of law country.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. It's a tyranny. Rule of law, extrajudicial freezing of bank accounts with no due process and no judicial oversight. Not a rule of law anymore. Chrystia Freeland, Fräulein Freeland.
Canada is a democracy.
Not anymore.
Operational decisions about law enforcement are taken by the police of jurisdiction. Quite appropriately, political elected officials have no role in the taking of those decisions.
Bullshit.
And that's why I don't have any further comment.
Oh, and that took me a minute to look at her face. Just look at this, by the way. Look at it with the volume down. What did you just say? She's demonic. I've used that word twice today, and for good reason. Everybody, good morning. Good morning. I had a Twitter space yesterday, very entertaining Twitter space, which I'm going to put together a short vlog later today, a car vlog. I'm going to go sit in the car, listen to the birds chirp, and highlight the fact that I did a 2-hour, or participated for 2 hours in a Twitter space with scientists, doctors, and PhDs who expose themselves for what they are, as relates to jab pushing, as I've said, demons who refuse. I asked the 3 of them at the end, how many jabs have you had? One confirmed 0. The other one refused to answer. And then after the stream, one of the doctors went to Twitter to confirm that he got myocarditis from his first jab. These are the people pushing this on other people and calling people like me, who subjected myself to 2 shots, anti-vaxxers. They can't go to hell fast enough. Okay. Will Chamberlain is in the backdrop, listening to me rant like a lunatic. Everybody share the link because it's super short notice. Or at least I set this up with super short notice. Will Chamberlain has a very similar name to Wilt Chamberlain. So when I was online doing my research, I'm like, holy crap, he played basketball. And then I realized, nope, I autocorrect went to Wilt Chamberlain, not Will Chamberlain. And then the internet, at least Google searches, not much on Will Chamberlain. I was watching some podcasts, and it seems that for whatever the reason lately, Will's been doing the rounds debating Dave Smith, or at least having discussions on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I pulled up a podcast with him and Michael Malice from 2019. I know some of you watching are already predisposed to not like him or make fun of him. He's a very smart guy. I happen to think he might be a little out in left field with some other stuff. We're going to talk about it. We've had a Twitter beef, and I said, look, instead of misunderstanding back and forth on Twitter, let's just have a discussion in real life. And he's in the backdrop. Wilt Chamberlain. Are you ready?
I'm here, brother.
Sir.
How's it going?
Oh, very good in yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom in like this. Now, what I'm gonna do, if you could give us the elevator pitch, hold on, because I'm gonna make sure my audio is good. Let me hear your audio for a second.
Sure. You hear me?
I think it's perfect. Chat, let me know if I'm too soft or too loud. Because for whatever reason, it sounds good to me, but there's always a few people in the chat who say I'm too loud or too soft. Will. You're not Will Chamberlain, and who is the Chamberlain Peace in Our Time guy? What was his first name?
Neville. That was
Neville. And you're not Neville. That was Chamberlain.
No relation. Thank God.
For those of us who don't know who you are, tell us who you are.
So I'm the former publisher of Human Events. I'm a lawyer by training. Former publisher of Human Events. Jack Posobiec, they're all still there, good friends. But most recently, I was working for the DeSantis campaign in June and July. And then I worked, after the layoffs that happened there, I worked at the executive office of the governor, so in his actual official office at the Capitol. And currently, I am senior counsel at the Article 3 Project and the Internet Accountability Project. Focus a lot on the Internet Accountability Project. Big tech has been a longer-term focus of mine in terms of fighting against censorship on social media platforms. So,
can I ask the indiscreet question how old you are? Because you look very young.
I'm 38.
38. Okay, you're a baby. No, I'm not trying to.
Right,
38.
I got a wife and a kid, man.
Only one kid?
Only one, yeah.
I say that the exponential difference is going from 2 to 3. 1 to 2, no big difference. 2 to 3, parents were outnumbered, and holy crab apples. Born and raised in Florida?
No, born and raised in California, and have moved around a lot as a result of. I went to law school in D.C., came back to California to work, went back to D.C. to work, moved down to Florida most recently. So I've been all over the place.
How many siblings do you have? I won't get too far into the family. Just I love.
Oh, sure. Just a younger sister.
And what do your parents do, or what did they do?
Oh, they're both retired. My mom was also a lawyer, although she left to be a stay-at-home mom when she met my dad. My dad did a variety of things. He was we lived in Silicon Valley. He was kind of a mid-level manager at Tandem Computers, which was bought out by Compaq, which was bought out by HP. And then most recently, he retired from his second career doing complex tax work.
So now I think people in the crowd might be suspecting you're either a closet Democrat or a CIA asset. You go from California to D.C. to study law.
Yeah, I got into Georgetown. So
Georgetown, okay.
Like the right thing to do.
Did you practice law after your degree?
Yep. I practiced complex commercial litigation at Quinn Emanuel in Los Angeles. And then I did nonprofit class action work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, where we fought against, we objected to unfair class action settlements. I can go into detail on that if you want to know how much time we have.
Well, we got. I say typically. I mean, if you got an hour and a half, we got an hour and a half. But
sure. This
is kind of interesting. So go in. You got to make people like you before they decide they hate you for the DeSantis stuff. So.
Oh, right. Okay. So anyway, well, Quinn Emanuel is like a big litigation firm that had a lot of interesting cases. Like, oddly enough, I turned down the opportunity to represent, for example, Bill Cosby, who we were representing in a defamation case. I had a client briefly that was on Dirty Money, Netflix's Dirty Money. I saw that later. So we had interesting, both plaintiff and defense side type work, and some white collar criminal defense, which is like the Dirty Money type stuff, and other and also just normal kind of civil business litigation. And then when I was at Competitive Enterprise Institute, what we were doing was we were objecting to unfair class action settlements. So if you ever get, one of those cards in the mail that it gives you like a $5 or less coupon that you say you get out of a settlement, well, that's the product of a class action lawsuit. And unlike you, who's getting just a coupon, the lawyers are often getting millions of real dollars, not just a coupon that you can use to buy something from the company that wronged you. So we would go in and object to those settlements and try and make it a little bit fairer and ensure that, the problem in those settlements is that there's this, kind of conflict of interest that the plaintiff's lawyers has. They have an incentive to maximize the amount of returns they get in terms of their fees that they're given to them by the court, while not really caring that much about how much you, the class members, get, because who cares? It's coupons, or who cares? It's a small amount of money. And you're also not their client, right? Like they might have one single client who's the lead plaintiff, but you, just the random class member who's not a part of the lawsuit officially, you're not their client. So there's a lot of tension there in terms of how that lawyer negotiates with the defendants. And so we were doing work to ensure that things were fair. And I'm pretty proud of that work. And it still goes on.
You say not for profit. Who do you go? I mean, who is your? You have to have standing. You have to have somebody who's your client. Who goes in and says, "I object to this"? It's one of the people who gets a $5 coupon and says,
"Exactly."
What the hell is this?
It's an unnamed class member, and so these class action lawsuits can have millions of people in the class, right? Like if you purchased, or a good example would be there was a false advertising claim about a particular olive oil that it said it was made in Italy, but in reality it used Greek grapes or Greek olives. Sorry. Well, if you bought that olive oil, you're a class member in the relevant time period. So if we find, if we see a class action settlement that looks off, we would solicit for anybody who is actually a member of the class and doesn't mind, being a unnamed class member and the named objector to the settlement.
But Barnes and I, we just covered one relatively recently. I forget the details. I think it was a credit card class action, and they were offering coupons. And the question was whether or not, I forget the details of it. But anyways, we've talked about this. It's interesting because some of these things, you get a notice in the mail, you're not aware of it. The lawyers are settling for millions for legal fees, and then dividing up coupons or actually no compensation for the members of the class. Now, someone said, I don't know if someone knows something that I don't know. Jesuit's going to Jesuit. You're not a religious person, are you?
I'm not Catholic.
Okay, I say sometimes the chat knows.
Jesuit. I'm not Catholic.
So
I'm not even religious, man. Like I don't know where people. I get this sometimes. People assume this is a random story. Bethany Mandel or the Mandel family. Like they invited us over for Shabbat dinner, and they assumed I was Catholic for some reason. I'm like, my mom's Jewish. My dad's Christian. I'm non-religious. Like,
dude, I totally assumed you were the furthest thing from Jewish that I could imagine.
Yeah, most people don't see it coming. That's true. I don't really look Jewish.
How tall are you?
6'2".
Yeah, you see, it's. I knew you were. You could tell by the good deep voice that you're a tall person. 6'2", Chamberlain. I wouldn't have seen that coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long did you practice for?
I didn't practice for all that long, honestly. I practiced for a little less than 2 years before I decided to kind of move into politics. So,
all right. And then how does that transition work? What year was this? And
this was 2017. So 2017, I moved to DC in March to take the job at the nonprofit. But then I was also getting, I was excited at Donald Trump winning in 2016 and wanted to come to DC and, because I was one of the only people in my social circle I knew that voted for Trump. I was doing big law. This is not a Trump-friendly environment in elite legal circles. Certainly not in 2016. So I was like, well, that means this is a good opportunity for me to come be a part of the movement. And so I came to DC. I knew Mike Cernovich, who I'm still friends with, and he was a very major Trump advocate at the time. And sort of got hooked into the people he knew in DC that were involved in pro-Trump activism. And so I met a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of friends. At the time, when I just started, I was doing cocktail hour type things, after work to try and meet people in the area and organize Trump supporters at the Trump Hotel in DC back when it was still the Trump. And then, once I got to that, I eventually decided to leave my job and try and do more politics stuff full time. And in 2019, I ended up buying Human Events, the rights to the intellectual property of Human Events with Raheem Kassam, or I'm sorry, I bought it. Let me put that clear. I bought it. Raheem was my partner at the time to try and and create a new magazine. And since then, it's been kind of like, what I was looking for is I didn't think we had a national review like on the populist side of the right. And I wanted to create Human Events to be that. That was my vision at the time.
Human Events, I know Posobiec is there. Human Events bought out, I want to say a Canadian outlet. I forget what it was.
Post Millennial. No, you're right. Human Events bought out Post Millennial, right? Like basically that at some point I brought in a business partner. And we had some editorial disagreements, and he was a much wealthier guy than I am, so it made sense for me to sell to him rather than the other way around. And so I sold my interest. And since then, he bought out Post Millennial, and so you have Human Events and Post Millennial under the same enterprise.
Okay, so you bought Human Events. How long were you involved with it for before you were bought out or sold out?
I want to say a full 2.5 years. it was finalized in 2022. Early 2022 is when the sale was finalized. So
all right, so you get into Human Events. I don't know what it was like back then because I don't think I was politically conscious at that time to the degree that I am now. But today it's amazing. Post Millennial does great work. Was it hard work getting that up and establishing a name and a brand for it?
It was challenging, and I'd never done news before. I came from the law, so I'm argue and debate. So I'm I'm an opinion editor type guy. That's primarily where I focused. And when Raheem and I separated pretty quickly after getting started, I kind of steered it towards focusing on opinion. You can read a lot of my old opinion pieces that I wrote there. They're still up. And I was just trying to do intellectually serious, but nationalist advocacy. I'm still very involved with, for example, the National Conservatism organization, and go to their conferences and speak, and I do their podcast every week. So yeah, I was looking to try and and a lot of it was because I felt like National Review did a terrible job. They just decided to go full on anti-Trump, and even after he was president, they were just obnoxious about it. And I thought there was a very intellectually serious case to be made for the Trump presidency and for the program that he was trying to implement through 2016 to 2020. And so I was really happy to see that the way he had kind of shifted the Republican Party too. That was a big thing. The Republican Party pre-Trump was terrible. It was just, neocon hawks, and it was just not nearly as good as it is now. So, and Trump gets a lot of credit for that, right? I see Trump as the catalyst to shifting the way the Republican Party, he made the Republican Party a lot better. That's what I think.
Hold on. Okay, we're going to shift into the actual meat of this now. So what I'm going to do for those on YouTube, we're going to end this on YouTube and coming over to Rumble, because now it's going to be getting into what you did for Trump, or what you did supporting Trump and the transition to a very proactive pro DeSantis. We're going to get there. Okay, we're ending on YouTube, everybody. The link to Rumble is there, or actually I should say this. Hold on. You can all come over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. We end on YouTube in 3, 2, 1 now. All right, well, so you get into politics. You're on, I don't want to say on the Trump train, because I don't view things that way, but you're supporting wholeheartedly Trump at the time, 2017 to 2020. Flesh that out. What are you doing? Is it I say paid in a non-cynical way? Is it just politically you're ideologically aligned? So
we're I'm running Human Events at the time. We're taking subscriptions and getting support. So in sort of an abstract sense, I have people who are probably, handing over money to Human Events because we're a pro-Trump outlet, I guess. And, but I don't want to, I'm not paid directly by any Trump affiliate or any part of the Trump campaign or, anything related to him.
Now you're supporting him, and you see the way the media from day one of the presidency is, I won't even say, what's the word? Not handcuffing his presidency, but overtly sabotaging it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I don't give any time to the media in terms of they were horribly unfair to him. A lot of people were horribly unfair. But the thing about being there and being in DC, and I knew plenty of people who worked in the administration, got a lot of, inside baseball in terms of what they were dealing with. There are huge staffing problems in terms of, and the ability of people who were in the American First Movement to actually get in the administration. One of the things that the way I look at Trump, and it's, you know, he's strangely flawed, right? He's unique talents and then unique flaws. And then the second big thing is that, you know, he's an excellent foreign policy president and a kind of mediocre domestic policy president. Like that's what I look at Trump. And the reason he was mediocre on domestic policy is because on foreign policy, he has much more personal direct responsibility, right? He can just make good decisions. And if he just makes good decisions on foreign policy, generally things are going to be okay, right? He's the guy who's ultimately in charge of our diplomacy, in charge of our war making, whatever. I thought he did a good job on that front. But man, he just really struggled to control the bureaucracy, to do anything with Congress. And in particular, like some of that's always going to be hard because you don't have full control of Congress, for example, obviously. But he did terrible with personnel and did terrible, you know, running his cabinet. And you know, for me, it's like you notice that basically every cabinet secretary, or like 90% of them, he decided they were losers. And you know, after they said bad things about him, and it's like, well, you're the guy who hired them. You know, you hired all these people. I think ultimately one of the things is he's not. I don't know if you read Jocko Willink's book on extreme ownership. The idea is that, like, as a superior, you are responsible for what happens underneath you, right? It's your fault, right? You don't get to blame your subordinates for things. Like, it's on you. You are in charge. And obviously there are some things you're not in charge of that you don't get the blame for, but you control who your cabinet secretaries are. You could fire them at any time. That's on you. And if your administration, your White House doesn't function, that's your fault as the president. And so I got really tired of that. I still supported him, and obviously I can't stand the Democrats. They're far, far worse. But, you know, especially once 2020 happened and he's out of office, I'm like, new blood, right? We need to go in a different direction. If we can keep somebody who's aligned with the policy, like, we should be going in a different direction here.
I mean, you name your cabinet minister, you name your cabinet right from the get-go. Once your first days in office, he gets sworn in on January 2021, right? The transfer of power. Just hypothetically, people often blame him for this. He hired the wrong people. He didn't fire the right people. He's coming into politics as an outsider, maybe thinks, and it's maybe my not defense of Trump because I'm pro-Trump. I'm not pro anything, despite what people think. I just say, like, he's an outsider coming in, think he's gonna bridge divides. He's gonna be able to convince, negotiate with the enemy. As typical politicians had done, but had no idea the degree to which they were going to play dirty. And what's he supposed to do? Like, just fire everybody who's part of the administration and hire his own people? How would it have worked in the ideal sense had he done everything right?
I mean, in the ideal sense, first off, I mean, he easily could have prevented the Russia special counsel investigation from even happening, right? This is a very small, like, a little known fact. And people don't really discuss it. And that's not to say that it wasn't unfair. Holy cow, was it a massive abuse of power, and everybody responsible in the FBI, needs to get thrown, just like have the book thrown at them. Don't get me wrong. If you remember, he fired James Comey, and that firing was the catalyst for the special counsel being appointed by Rod Rosenstein, right? It was the firing of James Comey. And why was that? Well, they fired James Comey, and Rod Rosenstein writes a memo about why the administration's firing James Comey that Donald Trump adopts, right? That Donald Trump signs off on. And that memo says James Comey meddled politically in the 2016 election by bringing up random news about Hillary Clinton and not handling the Hillary Clinton affair in an objective way. And Trump's like, fine, that's the reason to fire him. Okay. And then Trump, for no reason at all, gives an interview to Lester Holt where he contradicts his own his own deputy attorney general on the reasons for James Comey's firing, putting him in a terrible position in his own department. And it was a complete own goal. There was no reason to even do that interview. There was no reason to say something that was contrary to what your own administration had put out. And as a result, that was like the catalyst that kicked off the special counsel investigation. So there's a value to having the ability to put out disciplined communications as an administration, right? And Trump is an incredibly undisciplined communicator. And sometimes it's freewheeling and fun, but other times it really screws you. And this is a case where it really screwed him.
Well, if I play not even devil's advocate, but
yeah,
having lived through this and seen it,
yeah,
some are going to say, okay, there's literally nothing he could have said or not said that would have avoided it as of that position, as of that time. Say nothing.
I don't agree with that because Rod Rosenstein was his subordinate, right? Like if he had talked with Rod Rosenstein and not publicly contradicted him, right, on an issue as central, as important as the firing of James Comey, this would have been avoided, right? It was his administration that appointed the special counsel, and all he needed to do was listen to his lawyers. And this is actually a consistent theme through like where you're talking about the problems in the Trump administration, like the failure to take the good advice from his lawyers and like on things that did not have any substantive impact, right? Just literally on like his rhetoric. And as a result, like the administration was like hobbled from day one. And I think part of the reason, there's a lot of reasons I prefer DeSantis, but one of them is like, I've seen how his administration works firsthand. I literally worked in the Capitol. And when they need to be, when they're doing something important that they know will get legal scrutiny, the communications are incredibly disciplined. Everybody is on the exact same page. Everybody's saying the exact same thing about the reasons why the administration is doing something, right? And nobody goes off script. And that's valuable because it means that you actually achieve your goals. It means you win. It means courts don't start saying, oh, this was pretextual. Oh, you have other people saying things, you going crosswise. Like DeSantis is incredible, and his team is incredible at ensuring discipline and communications.
I'm trying to fact check one thing in real time.
Yeah.
Rosenstein created the Mueller investigation.
Mm-hmm.
In virtue of what authority did he do that? Or are you saying? He
had authority because Sessions had recused himself, right, from covering Russia, and so basically under special counsel, under like the regulations and basically the special counsel, whoever holds the post of attorney general has the authority to appoint a special counsel.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check something afterwards, but okay, so. Well, let's start with. So item number one, he didn't fire the right people. He didn't hire the right people. I don't think there's anything he could have done to avoid the Mueller investigation, silence or vocalness, because it was going to happen regardless, because it had been hyped up for the last 6 months.
I mean, I don't agree with that. Also, I don't agree with, there's also the fact that if he wanted to, he could have fired those people right off the bat too. He's still the president. Remember, he is the president of the United States. He has all the executive authority. And that includes, like, he can essentially say, oh, the DOJ has internal regulations about how a special counsel is appointed. Well, he's the president. He can just ignore them and impose his will on the Department of Justice. He didn't need to let that happen.
Okay, and then it's not Monday morning quarterback. It's just ignoring that there would have been nothing that he could have done. Fire them, dismiss it. Then there would have been a third impeachment. It just would have started with another one that he's interfering with an ongoing investigation into Russia collusion, impeachable offense. Okay, fine. So what is their specific catalyst under the Trump administration where you say this is it, no longer supporting him?
There wasn't one on the administration itself, right? I was supported the Trump administration. I was in Philadelphia in 2020. I don't know if you recall the video of the poll watcher getting kicked out of a polling place that went viral on election day. It was in Philadelphia. Like that was, everybody reposted it. It was like I actually think I'm personally responsible for kicking off Stop the Steal as a hashtag, because that tweet had stopped the steal. And there's actually been articles written about it, how it went viral after that tweet. So I was volunteering to help the Trump campaign in 2020 and wanted him to win re-election. I guess if you're talking about like where I was not happy, I was certainly after about late November, I was of the belief that there was absolutely no possibility of any of this, like essentially all the attempts to try and fight the election results were doomed to fail starting on like at least December 1st. And so I was not happy with like the whole attempt to start January 6th and like to bring people to the Capitol. I thought it was all dumb. And it's like, I couldn't articulate fully why, like I didn't predict what would happen, for example, but I saw it as a case. It's like, this can't possibly accomplish the ends that it's being designed to accomplish. I think at the time I even placed bets that, unpredicted at the time, you could place bets on whether Joe Biden would take office. And this is after the election, December 1st, when, almost most of the results had been confirmed, like certified at least. And people were still saying there was like a 15% chance that Trump would be president. And I just made a bunch of money betting against them because there was like a 0.01% chance in reality. And so I didn't approve of that. Certainly after January 6th, I was, I already, after he lost the election, I had already kind of made a decision that like, well, clearly we should move on here. I didn't even think that Trump would consider running again.
Let me stop you there. You say as early as December 2016, you don't feel the legal challenges are going to succeed.
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, because the part of two reasons. One is that they were clearly not ready for this in the sense that like they were very late. They were very slow getting those challenges filed. And then the second reason is you had people like Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell filing things that were absolutely insane. Like legal documents that were incoherent, completely like hadn't seen a proofreader, like, typos on everything everywhere. And just terrible arguments that
if I may stop you there though.
Support.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong. Linwood and Sidney Powell are not filing them for and on behalf of any official Trump campaign or Trump request.
Sure, but Sidney Powell's like, Trump put Sidney Powell up there next to Rudy Giuliani at one of those famous press conferences and had her go off. Basically, the entire thing got covered with the stench of incompetence.
Is there any part of you that thinks that this might have actually been overt sabotage? There's as many Republicans who want Trump out as there are Democrats.
I don't think it was overt sabotage. I mean, I think it was part of the problem is it's just there's too much. I'm not a big conspiracy believer if the conspiracy requires a lot of people to be involved because too many people would leak it. So I don't think it was overt sabotage. I think it's as simple as they were incredibly behind the eight ball. It wasn't just one state. They had 4 states that they had to challenge. They didn't have a great legal team on, that they did not have like the legal firepower they needed to challenge us if they were going to. And then they, they passively kind of let other people like Sidney Powell and Wood take the lead filing lawsuits that were insane. So I just thought it was pretty clearly doomed. And I thought like, okay. And part of me is just also, I think from my perspective, like, I was there in Philadelphia and I kind of got a view of fraud that was interesting, right? So I saw, they kicked the poll watcher out of the polling place with my own eyes. I filmed it. I watched it. I did another Periscope where there was an incident at a polling place where a Democrat poll worker had cast an illegal vote because they had voted absentee already. And instead of voting provisionally not that they had voted absentee, but they had received an absentee ballot. And in Pennsylvania, if you receive an absentee ballot, if you want to vote on election day, you need to present it in person to get a real ballot. Otherwise, you have to vote provisionally. This poll worker refused to do that and just went ahead and voted straight away. The entire apparatus of RNC politicos descended on this public school in Philadelphia to deal with this one vote that might have been illegal or was illegal. And it made me realize it's like, okay, if this is able to bring everyone that I was seeing at Trump headquarters, if this is able to bring 20 people to deal with this one vote, like there's some shenanigans, but there isn't mass fraud, right? There isn't like the level of fraud that would essentially overturn, tens and tens of thousands.
Yeah,
of
but because you use the word fraud, and then the question is going to be if it's the result of recently changed regulations, then it's not fraud with the capital F, but what it is constitutionally invalid ballots or votes that could be challenged.
I agree that there's that issue in Pennsylvania, but there's 3 or 4 other states too. And trust me, I'm not a fan of mail-in voting. I think that it opens up the possibility of mass fraud.
Well, I mean, everybody knows that. Anybody who denies it is just not even listening to what they were saying 10 years ago. But the question was this, though. So you say they're doomed to fail in December in your view, but from what you're describing, it sounds more on a procedural, strategic level and not on a substantive level. The question that I have for all DeSantis supporters is, to me, and I didn't mean to like reduce you to a DeSantis supporter. My question to you is, it sounds like you're acknowledging that there were shenanigans afoot for the election and that their mistake was not on the substance, but rather on the strategy through which to challenge it legally.
I think I think for me, it's substantively unclear whether or not there was sufficient fraud. I view it as very unlikely, right? That's how I'll put it, right? I think it's very unlikely that there was sufficient fraud to overturn the election. Not impossible and not provably false, but unlikely. I think substantively, they were always going to have the challenges also were probably going to fail even if they got past these procedural hurdles. It's 4 states. They had to win in all 4. They weren't just trying, this wasn't a 1-state issue. It's a 4-state issue.
I'll disagree. I would disagree with you there and say if they've proven fraud or constitutionally invalid ballots in one state, that is the catalyst of the victory. Well, then there might be enough of a push to say redo, because if it's proven in one state, well, it wouldn't have impacted the other states. Well, we don't know that. And so,
well, but that's distinct to Pennsylvania. Like the Pennsylvania issue is the fact the votes were constitutionally infirm in Pennsylvania because of a particular provision in the Pennsylvania Constitution, right?
And I'm thinking Wisconsin also. Wisconsin was the indefinite confinement, right, where they had 220,000 ballots from COVID indefinitely confined, which some people might argue legally are in fact constitutionally invalid.
Right. I guess like that's the best, the best you can hope for is like some sort of redo out of that. But I don't know. I thought these, it was just very clear, like, maybe those would have worked if they had had more time or better lawyers or were quicker
or judges that
challenges, but they weren't ready. And here's another point, which is sort of connected to the extreme ownership thing I was talking about. Like the way I view it is like, that's on Trump and his team, and they didn't have that ready. Like they weren't ready for it. It's like, okay, like I'm not angry at you, but then I'm also not patient with the, like, one of the big tensions and things that I found very frustrating about like Trump 2024 is it's like, I say, oh, well, you're not president. You lost. And they're like, no, we won. It's like, okay, you won. All right. You sure? You can't prove that, obviously. Like you can't prove that you had the votes. You say things were unfair, but you didn't, you at the time had more power to stop shenanigans than you ever would have. You were the president of the United States, vested with the full power of the federal government. Now you're a private citizen. And the idea that you're going to be more able to deal with fraud and more able to fight these shenanigans as someone who is as a private citizen than you were as president, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, well, I think that you...
And not to defend you, but to legitimize some of this critique, Robert Barnes and we were, I remember now in retrospect, starting in 2020, when there were private litigations and settlements. I think it was in Georgia, the DNC or Democrat activist organizations, they were entering into settlements as to changing the rules for mail-in ballots. And Barnes and I, at the time, it was more him. He's saying, like, they're a little bit behind the ball in the pre-election litigation. They haven't hired the best team for the election litigation. All that being said, all right, but if there was fortification afoot, which there was, and it not broad enough to impact the election is something we'll never know, but it existed, and you acknowledge that it existed. But the criticism is he didn't do a good enough job fighting the corruption. I'll get into whether or not you have no idea how corrupt it is to fight back, whether or not DeSantis and his idealism can do it. That he who has never done has never made the mistake yet. But if you acknowledge that the system is so fundamentally corrupt that it would change the rules, it would arguably constitutionally invalidate certain ballots, and then the corruption of the system is that which would not hear the cases on the merits, so you're going to drop support for the person who is the victim of that. That's where I have the biggest objection or the biggest problem to all of this is, even if it's right, what you're basically saying is, yeah, he didn't do a good enough job fighting the corruption of the system and was a victim to it, so we're going to abandon him.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, my view, it's not abandon him, it's that you don't get a mulligan. Like, I especially when we have a guy like DeSantis, who's a Harvard-trained lawyer and who's much more legally sophisticated.
Well, Will, I'll stop you there. Some people might think the Harvard-trained lawyers, 4 of whom on the Colorado bench just voted to get, agreed to get Trump off the ballot. Harvard-trained might not make them smarter and street smarter. It might actually make them more ruthless. The problem.
Right? Like this is, and the thing is, I'm, this is one of my theses, and the campaign's never going to adopt this. This is my thesis, right? Republicans haven't really tried haven't gone the lawyer route in a while for president. And, there's this, the broad thesis of Trump is like, oh, he's a deal maker. We need somebody who makes deals. And I look at the modern Democratic Party and I'm like, we don't want to make deals with these people. We want to use power and wield it and impose it on them. And to do that, you need somebody who walks into the White House and understands in detail what are his powers, right? And to me, Trump doesn't do that. Trump was like a novice pilot in a 747 when it came to his powers under the Constitution. He didn't know what buttons he could press. He pressed a few buttons, and it's I think DeSantis actually laid this out pretty elegantly, I think maybe yesterday, where he described this distinct difference between how Trump is perceived and the media narrative around Trump and the actual Trump, right? The media narrative is Trump was this tyrant. He used all his power abusively. And if he came into power again, he'd be a dictator. And I laugh at this because my view of Trump is the opposite. He's a pussycat in office. He didn't wield the powers available to them. I mean, there's other examples I can bring up. The wall, the National Emergency Declaration, dear Lord. But basically, Trump is not that legally sophisticated. He didn't have a good understanding of his powers. He tried some things very early on with things like the travel ban, got huge blowback, and then after that, he basically was like, whatever, left the machine on autopilot. And I want somebody who's a much more legally sophisticated guy, because I want for the populist movement, I want our Obama, not in the sense of like what he did substantively, right? Obama doesn't agree with us, but I want somebody who is as effective at advancing our objectives as Obama was effective at advancing Democrat objectives. And I think the guy who's going to put up W's on the board for us is DeSantis.
This is what I think is unfair about what you're saying right now, is that your perspective of what Trump should have done, the powers that he could have wielded, other than being untested, they have the benefit of the last, what is it now, 8 years of seeing the degree to which a corrupt regime will sabotage, will attack, will try to jail somebody. And you say like, okay, well, you now know this and are holding this standard to Trump in 2016. I don't think anybody could have foreseen the degree and the depths of depravity to which the left would sink to sabotage, to lie, to spy, to persecute. And so you have this hindsight now that you're holding against Trump at the time, when he's got the same hindsight now, and arguably is the only one who's had direct experience of this type of corruption. And yet somehow you think DeSantis, who has never experienced it, if you want to,
he's experienced a lot of nonsense coming at him from the Florida Democrats. Remember, he's been governor for 6 years with a very hostile press and hostile Florida Democrats, and he's just beaten them nonstop.
Well, there's hostile, and then there's trying to lock him up hostile. Okay, and he's got 2 young kids, and maybe he's not that much of a threat to them yet, where they even see this as the necessary means. But for anybody who, and I keep saying this, for anybody who thinks that they will not indict DeSantis for human trafficking, fraudulent, inducements, for anybody who doesn't think they'll do that if he's seen as a threat, and if they don't do it, it's because they don't see him as a threat, which could be a problem in and of itself.
This is the difference. If DeSantis is president, he won't be indicted for any of that stuff by the federal government. You know why? Because his attorney general will be a loyalist to DeSantis personally. He won't be just some random guy. He'll be a loyalist. And his Department of Justice will run exactly the way he wants it to. Unlike Donald Trump, who's just not legally sophisticated and didn't understand that the Department of Justice wasn't independent. And this isn't a hindsight thing. This is a thing that was obvious at the time because I was berating him about it at the time. The Department of Justice, this is not Israel, where the Attorney General's office is separate from the government and the government doesn't have any control of the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General is a presidential appointee. He serves at the pleasure of the president. He can be fired whenever the president wants to, and the president makes the next appointment. It's the president's job to ensure that take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And DeSantis understands that. He's explained this in detail on the campaign trail repeatedly. You can find plenty of video about it. The difference is, I think people are too black-pilled in this distinct sense. They think that the sort of attack that Trump faced from within his own administration is inevitable under any Republican administration. No. It's certainly, there might be people who try a stunt like this, but the president has sufficient power, if wielded and properly, to defeat any sort of internal insurrection from the Department of Justice. Those people work for him. Your employees, ultimately, those people don't get to pull all these shenanigans. They're your employees. So, I think this is where, again, back to the original thesis, it is, if we have the chance to have somebody in office who is in the America First wing on policy, but substantially more legally sophisticated, that's going to be a better outcome for our movement.
All right. Well, I mean, some might disagree with that, but I'll say one thing. I mean, a comment in Rumble says, DeSantis has the majority government in Florida, so that's one material distinction between that and having insiders literally trying to sabotage you from within your own party.
Trump had, basically, here's the difference. Remember, when they started, Trump and DeSantis were in functionally the same position. Both of them, Trump had bare majorities in the House and Senate, so did DeSantis. DeSantis didn't win by big margins in 2018, right? He won by half a point over Andrew Gillum. The difference is DeSantis was a much more effective wielder of his executive power. And it was so effective and so popular that he transformed a half-point victory into a 20-point landslide in a state that historically had been very purple. This is the hanging Chad state. This is the state that, go back to 2000, Bush v. Gore, the entire country was like, over a few hundred votes decided who was president in Florida. Now it's a red state 20-point landslide for DeSantis. The guy knows how to wield the executive power effectively and just is an absolute bulldozer. And this is in terms of like, you look at what he managed to do on his domestic agenda. He got as much as he could done with the power he had in 2018, which was substantial, won, and then did a whole lot more in 2022 when she had his supermajorities. And it's like, I think people are just honestly like, I try very hard not to critique Trump supporters because I was one, and I have a lot of sympathy for Trump supporters, a lot of empathy, I guess. But like, I think people are just like a little too forgiving, I guess, on this point, or just like DeSantis is more legally sophisticated. People have been trying all sorts of games against him, and he fights them off. I mean, a good example of this, like the Trump campaign tried to like file a, not the Trump campaign, sorry, the Trump super PAC, tried to file a ethics complaint against DeSantis. It got batted away because, DeSantis had stalked his ethics committee with people who were on his team. So even in a world, it wasn't substantively true. It was a BS complaint, but it was just never going to succeed. DeSantis is much better at the sort of legal and bureaucratic chess that it requires to actually be president and manage a hostile bureaucracy than Trump ever was.
Let me do something here. I'm going to bring up there's some questions in the Rumble Rant section of this. Now I'm going to we'll try to go quickly because there's a few that I want to highlight. Let me see. Ginger, not to ignore all of them. There's one that I know that Trump only challenged Georgia. Everything else was people co-opting on behalf of Trump, says Ginger Ninja. I won't get to the Vivek question. Will, are you saying a better challenge would have been heard by the court? You think the courts were unbiased arbiters from Ginger Ninja? This is the Will, would the court, I mean, if you can see that there was some voter fraud, just the tip, but that they did a bad job bringing it to the courts, and somehow DeSantis will miraculously, do a better job faced with similar fraud, and the courts will be amenable to hearing it. I don't know how to finish the second part of that question, other than to say, based on what, other than a dream and a wish.
I think DeSantis would have been more effective at the pre-election litigation. I think the Trump team found themselves very much behind the eight ball because they did so poorly in the pre-election litigation. And it's just I don't know that there's ever a good way to make. Basically, once you lose on the numbers on election day, the odds that you will be able to challenge something within like the 6-week period that you get are extraordinarily low. So I'm not saying that DeSantis would have been better, if you put them both in the same exact position on election day 2020 and then say, you both are in charge of the White House, you have to figure out how to stay in power. I would have said both, nobody's can stay in power. And in fact, DeSantis would have probably not even bothered with all this stuff and just said like, no, we're taking the L. We didn't get it done. But what I'm saying is that because he's a lot more legally sophisticated and because he's hired people who are more legally sophisticated, who are loyalists to him, the pre-election period would not have been dominated by Mark Elias winning litigation in every single state, including red states. It would have Republicans would have won some of those, those cases. He would have just been much more on top of it. And I think that's to me, that's a logical conclusion from Trump's general lack of legal sophistication and constantly getting tripped up by the courts throughout his presidency. Whereas it's, on the other hand, in Florida, it's DeSantis imposing his will using the legal system, being very sophisticated and using his executive power. I mean, a really good example of this is DeSantis is the only guy who's fired a Soros prosecutor, and he's fired 2 of them, right?
Yeah, but some people are going to argue that he did that specifically because he's channeling a very Trump-esque type style.
I mean, Trump, it's completely different than Trump fired Comey and just found himself in a world of pain. And again, didn't put out disciplined communications. And as a result, the Russia investigation started. When I'm talking about disciplined communications, did you see when DeSantis put out the message about why these people were fired? And was there any disagreement? Was there any, were people talking differently about it? There was a very specific reason that these people were fired. And the administration from top to bottom was disciplined about communicating that it was for that reason. And as a result, like it's, they've succeeded. I think the most recent news is that Andrew Warren, who was the Tampa area prosecutor who was fired, was not going to run for re-election because he felt like he had completely been defeated. That's what we want to do. We want to impose the kind of defeats legally on the left that the left managed to impose on Trump. If we want to do that, the way we're going to do that is with substantially more legal sophistication from the top down. And that starts with a commander-in-chief who's extremely legally sophisticated.
I'm going to read these. Arkansas crime attorney says, completely agree, Viva. This is why we need people with, this is why I have a problem with people like this. Harvard-trained lawyers is not the people I want. Harvard invalidated DeSantis. I don't know what that means. Ginger Ninja says, you're holding contradictory arguments. Trump did a poor job on proving the election was stolen. DeSantis would have done a better job at the challenges. The election probably wasn't stolen. That's a fair critique. That the election was legit. Well, I guess I can make that.
Make both arguments. I don't see
you could make a match. You say like, even if there was a minimal amount of fraud, DeSantis would have been better. It's fair enough. Okay, well that we won't hold that against you as a determinate flaw in your argument. Hold on, let me just get a couple more of these because there's some good ones in here. How do I do this? So I'll bring it up here. DeSantis started channeling Trump more eloquently. However, after he announced presidential run, he started acting like the politician he is. We're going to get to that actually. And Will, I'll give you credit for being more honest in his reasons. I see him no different than blind Trump supporters that cannot admit Trump made mistakes. He is kidding himself with all the legal arguments, and Vivek filed an amicus brief in support of Trump to keep him on the ballot. Thoughts? Yeah, I like Vivek. Okay, some people are going to say, this is the number one criticism. You say all these things about how he's amazing and would wield executive powers, would manage the executive, would govern to the... He can't run his own campaign. And I'm not saying that. I don't expect anybody who...
Well, this is the Nikki Haley argument, right?
Oh, I don't care whose it is. I mean, a good argument is a good argument.
This is not a good argument. And here's why. Basically, all the talk about he can't manage his campaign is about the super PAC, which he's legally barred from interacting or coordinating with. Like, if
hold on. Let me stop you there. Now you have an inconsistency. Trump is being held to account because of what other lawyers do in other lawsuits not related to him. But DeSantis gets a free pass on his shitty super PAC, who seems to be making a fool of him.
He's literally legally barred from managing it, right? He can't. If he did anything to coordinate, he'd get an FEC violation. This is different from like your voluntary association with lawyers, right? Rudy didn't have to let Sidney Powell go up on stage. Right? Like,
well, in fairness there, she went up twice, the first and the last time, and then Trump said, get the hell away from this woman.
Yeah, right. Well, in any event, I think, as I said, I don't think it's so much like, I think he did a poor job. I mean, it was a shit show post-election, period. I don't necessarily think a much better job would have led to a different outcome if you've already lost all the pre-election litigation. I want to make that clear, right? I think that ultimately, you lose all that pre-election litigation, you're going to need to win by a lot more votes. Let's put it that way, right? You're going to
beyond the margin of fraud, as Barnes would say.
Right, exactly. But I guess the substantive point on this, I lost my train of thought.
It was the Nikki Haley argument.
Oh, the Nikki Haley argument. Yeah. Like, he literally can't manage the super PAC. He can't. He just can't. I mean, trust me, I know he wishes he could. I know he wishes he could manage the super PAC. He can't manage it. So it's not...
I think, look, I don't know the nuance of presidential campaigns to know exactly where all of these subtleties lie. I don't think there's anybody out there. I'm not asking you for your opinion on this. I don't think there's anybody out there, even on the DeSantis camp, who thinks the campaign is being run properly. I don't know that it can be as easily attributed solely and exclusively to this PAC. I think it's been run badly. I mean, I like DeSantis. This is what people don't seem to understand. I moved to Florida. I like DeSantis as a governor, and I'm actually disappointed because whether or not he wins or loses, right now he's losing in a way that's discrediting, almost undermining his legacy, and it upsets me to see.
Personally, I think the DeSantis campaign has been held to a much I don't know. I think they've been treated pretty harshly. But what I will say about this is the number, and this has been publicly stated by the people. I think the polling started going the wrong direction when Trump got indicted. And it's like you can actually trace it. It's like the day of the first indictment is when
I might agree with you. His numbers might have started tanking when Trump got indicted because he stabbed him in the back. Like everyone was talking about stabbing him in the back, having run for president despite the endorsement. Forget that. He stabbed him in the back when he comes out and says, "I don't know what goes into a hush money payment." That's a stabbing in the back, man. That's when I started losing it with.
I mean, the thing is, it's like I don't begrudge him that because Trump stabbed him in the back like right before his reelect. I mean, go back 3 days before the reelection in
2020,
in 2022.
2022.
Right?
Okay.
Trump's doing a rally and is insulting DeSantis 3 days before he's running for re-election. Like Trump isn't running at that point. At that point, right? Like 3 days before a general, the Republicans should be pro-Republican, period. Right? There shouldn't be any infighting. We're facing Democrats, right? And Trump insulting him. And throughout, before DeSantis even ran, like it was just nonstop personal attacks on DeSantis, like all throughout that time, right? Like from Trump personally, from his surrogates, like just insulting him constantly, right? Why? Because because DeSantis wouldn't endorse, right? DeSantis wasn't willing to endorse yet. And as a result, just endless vitriol. So the idea that DeSantis would like get a dig into Trump and all of a sudden it would be seen as this betrayal, given months of unreturned vitriol from Trump personally and his campaign. I mean, it's like you expect DeSantis to be loyal to a guy who wasn't remotely loyal to him, who was like, so I don't see a reason. Like DeSantis did his job. DeSantis got an endorsement in 2018 and did what he helped deliver Florida for Trump in 2020, was very positive on Trump during Trump's administration. The idea that Trump is owed this permanent loyalty is nonsense.
In our locals community, Astral Doge Plays says politicians love to donate to their PACs, but they have no control over them whatsoever. Okay. Then we've got Jay Stevenson says DeSantis put those people into his PAC. Also, he's coordinated with that PAC in unprecedented closeness. Which PAC are we talking about?
Never Back Down. Never
Back Down. Okay. In as much as you're allowed to, talk about this, I don't know who he put into these PACs and what he coordinates with them. Do you know of any truth to that?
I don't know. I don't know the details, and I didn't learn any details when I was on the campaign. So, like anything I say on this is just like I'm in the same boat y'all are in terms of like relying on publicly reported information.
All right, and then we got Kay Coolian says, "Isn't DeSantis in trouble for directly coordinating with the super PAC?"
No, I mean, the Trump campaigns tried to file like ethics complaints against him because Trump's a snitch too. Like, sorry, this is another reason I get annoyed with like Trump complaining about weaponization all the time. He's like, "Oh, it's so unfair. They're weaponizing. It's unfair to try and kick candidates on the ballot." Meanwhile, they're trying to kick DeSantis off the ballot.
I think they're trying to give DeSantis not a taste of his own medicine, but a taste of the Democrats' own medicine. And in as much as
that's excuses.
No, but no, it's not.
You want there to be unity between the Republicans. Well, how unfair everybody's being to Trump. You don't pull these shenanigans.
Well, first of all, if you also say that there's no loyalty owed and then fault someone for snitching, I mean, these are those are mutually incompatible. It's
because of the nonsense that like he doesn't know any loyalty.
He did this,
right?
Okay.
And like there's the demands for loyalty constantly from DeSantis, like, well, you need to support Trump and his blah 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 blah.
Well, I mean, I understand those arguments, but okay, so hold on one second. Now, I forgot this part. When did you get involved in the DeSantis campaign?
June of this year. Oh no, June of last year rather.
June 2022. No, it's got to be June 2023.
Okay, roughly 6 months ago. 7 months ago.
I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm nosy, and if you can't answer or it's too personal, don't.
Sure.
What was your capacity, or what capacity were you working as?
I was in the communications, messaging, talking points, stuff like that.
All right, I'm going to ask you the question I asked. Have I asked? I've asked it publicly. Mm-hmm. Do they pay? Does this campaign pay social media influencers? I'm not naming anybody. Not Cardillo. Not Ruben, who doesn't need this for a hole in the wall. I presume all campaigns engage in social media influence, pay influencers to put out positive messages, like the government of Canada did for COVID. Does the campaign do this? Are you allowed to say answer?
I think I can't. I mean, like I will say, like I can say this. Everything I know about the campaign outside of it, right, from not being employed, is the answer is no, right? But I can't discuss anything. I can't discuss like the inner workings of the campaign.
Okay, and from the outside, the answer is no, and that would be like, here's $5,000. Put up a favorable post to a random social media guy with 50,000.
I would be shocked just from my outside experience. I'd be shocked.
All right, now this is another question.
This is not advocating against campaign. I can't like just from an influencer perspective, like as a person who was invited to things before joining the campaign, right? I was, for example, invited to go to the re-election win, and so I talk with other influencers in that context. It's like we didn't, you got invites to go to events to celebrate his victories. Like influencers got like invites to go to the inauguration. They didn't pay you to come. Right? You bought a ticket. If you wanted to go to the inauguration, you bought a ticket and paid your way. If you wanted to go to whatever, you bought a ticket and paid your way. I think that's all that stuff is just like manufactured hearsay from Trump world. That's just, I don't think it's true.
Okay, fair enough. And the question is this also, is there like overt coordination? Because where we've had our back and forths, and part of our back and forths have to do with what I perceive to be as like, if it's not overtly coordinated, it certainly looks that way. On the same day, you've got Stephen Dace, Justin Hart, any number of others posting that picture of Trump saying he looks old, yada, yada. Messaging is virtually identical. Timing is virtually identical. Is it organic or is it strategy?
It's organic. I didn't talk with anybody about posting those photos. I just did it. I thought they made an important point. Right? Like, it doesn't take much to like see those photos and be like, that's part of the attack, right? Like this is another, I'm a firm believer that 77 is too old to be president. Like if I were invested in a company and they made a 77-year-old CEO, I'd sell my stock. Like it's just, and the presidency is too important. You need a man in his prime.
Well, that's why the people will just radically disagree. There's some things like,
of course,
I made the analogy.
Part of the reason I've been posting those photos over and over again is it's like, I'll be honest, it's a little trolly. Like I get, I get an enormous number of replies of people angry about me posting that photo. And I just am like laughing because I'm like, well, now I'm monetizing these. This is X. So if y'all are going to be angry about me posting this photo, I'll keep posting.
Well, I'll tell you, my biggest problem with the photo is it appears as though it either might be not Photoshop, but you enhance sharpness, you can bring out wrinkles, or you're just taking a photo.
That photo, I stole it from somebody else.
No, I know, and I tried to
posted by a Trump supporter.
Well, no, I'm
sure.
Well, the original post that I was trying to do like a reverse image search to see if I could find an original that looked, when you put things through a sharpening filter, it'll make someone look older. B, when you take a hard flash of someone in a low light setting, it's going to make them look older. I saw Trump the night before. Didn't look like he did in that picture. So either he's looking tired on one.
He's always in makeup. I mean, part of the point of this is like there's this effort from Trump world to like make Trump seem like this youthful, vigorous figure, and he's a 77-year-old man.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is this reminds me of like Soviet Union era Brezhnev is super healthy type stuff. Like, I mean, he's 77. There's a lot of wisdom there, I'm sure, but like somebody younger should be president. Like Biden is too old. Biden is way too old.
No, but Biden is not too old. He's demented, and I'm not saying that to make fun of him. Trump is neither too old nor demented, and some might argue that DeSantis is too young. I mean, I don't go for the too young argument if you have the requisite experience.
I mean, he's got 6 years as the governor, the third biggest, I think.
But I wouldn't go with too young versus too old. It's only a question of too competent or too incompetent versus competent.
Yeah, well, I think that, as I've described, I saw Trump as having a lot of competence issues from 2016 to 2020 in terms of how he managed his administration. And the way I look at it is like, why would we assume that would get better? And I'll make one more point. This is, I think, something that people really aren't thinking about. Between 2016 and 2020, Trump was really tempted to basically curry the favor of the New York Times and celebrities. Like he had Kim Kardashian in the office in criminal justice reform. He wanted to do amnesty. Like he was trying to appease the left all the time. And what pulled him back from that is just incredible pressure from the conservative base and Breitbart and whatever to be like, don't do that. Don't do amnesty. But like that was his natural inclination. Why does that work? Well, it's because he needed to win re-election, so he couldn't just alienate his voters. Well, what happens when a 78-year-old Trump, who we know very much values the adulation of fellow celebrities and the adulation of the New York Times, what's he going to do when he's president and there's no more elections to win?
Well,
Will, we're just going to make deal after deal with the left.
Well, first of all, I think you answered your question, and that was going to be my next question. Someone with nothing to lose is going to be a much more formidable individual that doesn't need to negotiate. That's someone who's looking out for their political future. No,
right?
but the argument you just made, I think, works as much against you as you might think it works for you. Why would he do it? He wouldn't try to negotiate. He wouldn't try to gain the adulation. He's got nothing to gain. He's got no second term. It's come in, clean house, and then make it nice for the next Republican that comes in 2028. That should have been DeSantis. That would be the strongest argument.
I mean, it's there, but I think the much more likely scenario is one where he just does all these deals with Democrats on issues that.
I think the logic to support that position is not there. I think that when you don't have to worry
about perfectly there. Like, what did he not have Kim Kardashian into the White House and like laud him, sign exactly like this jailbreak bill that she wanted? Like, did that not happen? Or, I mean, did he not have Lindsey? Does he not still pal around with Lindsey Graham at every rally? You talk about like people have tried to falsely impute a relationship between DeSantis and Paul Ryan, which doesn't exist. Paul Ryan endorsed the horrible Nikki Haley, right? Like, Lindsey Graham is still a Trump surrogate, guys. Like, neocon number one, Lindsey Graham, still a Trump surrogate.
Well, now that you mentioned Ron Paul? What was his name? Paul Ryan, endorsing Nikki Haley. What do you say about Vivek's prediction that DeSantis is going to be VP for Nikki?
I think that's ridiculous. The much more likely outcome is that Nikki Haley will be Trump's VP.
Oh God, you guys! It's so stupid. Will, this was one of the.
He needs the money. He's got legal fees up the ass. He wants the establishment votes. Ultimately, Trump is not as ideologically committed as DeSantis is. Right? DeSantis actually is like much more ideologically committed to certain policy ideas.
Well, which Paul? There's a number of things that I want to deal with.
If Lindsey Graham can be Trump surrogate number one in South Carolina, then Nikki Haley certainly, who was already hired by Trump, let's not forget, already in Trump's administration, can certainly be his vice president.
Well, she could certainly be. She just won't be because I think he's publicly disavowed, at least through his kids, that it was a bullshit
he's
story
never
from
squarely,
NBC.
He's never squarely said it. He's been
but I don't expect people to squarely state the obvious, like, hey, condemn violence. No, I'm never going to squarely condemn violence because it doesn't need to be squarely condemned. For anybody with half a brain, I think Don Jr. came out and said it's bullshit. The story itself,
Don Jr. said he would do everything in his power to stop it. Which and remember also, I saw this is I love Jack. Don't get me wrong, Jack's my boy, right? But I saw Jack and Bannon on War Room, and they had a clip where Bannon's like, "There's going to be a huge battle with the establishment to keep Nikki Haley off the ticket." I'm like, I support a candidate who there won't be any battle at all. Like, DeSantis has contempt for Nikki Haley. Like, there's never been a question. Vivek has been the first person to try and even bring this up. It makes no sense. And moreover, DeSantis has said, one, he's not going to be VP. And I'm pretty sure he also said that he wouldn't have Haley as a
well, we're going to say, I said it. If it turns out to be true, Vivek is going to be the smartest man in the room for a long time. Yeah. It's almost, I won't say it's, I think it's a little bit less likely than Scott Adams and Laura, what's her name? No, Ann Coulter's predictions of Trump. Hold on. So there were two things that I wanted to get. The Nikki Haley story, that was one of the stories run in tandem. You don't sit down and meet with Steve Deace and Justin Hart and Cardillo to say, or DM
on Twitter. Like, this is, I mean, it's this, I don't assume that there's a huge amount of coordination going on the Trump side either, because I understand how Twitter works, right? Basically, it's like, if you read Twitter, you see like interesting takes and interesting things that are getting engagement. And if something like seems fun to you, you just write a tweet about it. That's how it works. It doesn't require, like, I don't have DMs with Cardillo and being like, actually I did have a DM with Cardillo that was like, after we had both posted on the same topic, he said to me, he's like, hey, they really don't like that photo, do they? And I'm like, no, they don't. Ha ha. It's not coordination. We just did it on our own because we know how social media works.
Okay, it's funny. Now, hold on. There were I want to get to some of what I think are the weakest arguments. You got the old age. The DeSantis is doing better. By the way, just so you know, and you should feel good about this, because a lot of my our community, they're not they're pro-Trump, and I think for good reason. Will continues to argue in good faith, and that's refreshing. But I hear the overall argument: Ron is going to do what Don said he'd do, just better. But Ron says the guy's crazy. I'm not that.
Actually, I want to address that very specifically. Like, you should go back and listen to the interview he did after the debate that just happened on CNN. Go listen to that interview, because repeatedly Anderson Cooper presses DeSantis on, do you think Trump has the character to be president? And like, DeSantis doesn't say like, no, he's blah, blah, blah. Basically, DeSantis is like, well, he didn't fulfill his promises. He didn't do a good job on the wall. He didn't make Mexico pay for it.
Well, so actually, thank you. One point, he didn't build the wall. How many miles do we concede that Trump actually built?
50?
Okay, I think it's 400 to 500. That's why.
But a good chunk of that is replacement, right, of already existing barrier. So like,
well, I mean, but that's
50
still,
miles.
All right. So you see,
I was so deep on this. I didn't even talk about the national emergency. God, this was so ridiculous. Trump had the authority to declare a national emergency to build the wall. I did huge numbers of periscopes and legal research on this. Went public all the time. I'm sure he had plenty of people who were just as sophisticated in his White House that understood, like, he has the authority, if he wanted to just use the executive authority he had at the time. Instead of doing that, he signed a bill with Schumer and Pelosi on board that had a provision that basically prohibited him from building any further wall. Like, he just got completely snookered by the Democrats on the wall issue. And so, all this nonsense about how he built the wall, like, if you were there and like actually in the debate at the time and arguing in the weeds, it's the most, like, it's just a joke. Like, no, he didn't. That's why do you think we have the record number of new illegal crossers every single day? Why is there a crisis at the border? If there was a wall, we wouldn't have the crisis. Trump didn't get it done, right? And I want, again, somebody who is much more effective and sophisticated at wielding executive power so that we do get it done. And that's DeSantis.
I'm going to check something on the wall while we get to the next point.
Sure.
Which one was it? It was... okay, so we got the old argument, we got the NBC article argument that people are running the wall to be determined. That's why I can't do all the fact check in real time. If the distinction is new wall versus replacement, and
you can just say DeSantisLies.com.
Oh God, I mean, look, we can agree on one thing. I loathe Nikki Haley. That it was so stupid and so juvenile and so irritating.
Yeah.
The DeSantisLies.com. Oh, and then what was the lie that he accused her of? It was about the gas tax. And then she says, that's a lie. DeSantis. And then she says, meanwhile, she admitted the thing about the gas tax. I forgot. It doesn't matter.
I think her argument was something like, well, I was willing to do an increase in the gas tax commensurate with a decrease in income tax. So I wasn't proposing a net tax increase. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't mean DeSantis is lying. It's just like an unfair characterization, maybe. I don't know. Like, and boy, if you want to look at unfair characterizations and talk about how Nikki Haley tried to call Thomas Massey an anti-Semite, that was pretty obnoxious. I can't stand that woman. No, I do Nikki, Rand Paul's anti-endorsement of Nikki Haley this morning. I thought it was right on.
Okay, now I remember the point. The major critique of DeSantis is what some people perceive, and I've got to say I see it as well, a bit of flip-flopping on substantive issues depending on what some people allege are expectations of donors. Support for Ukraine, whether or not he would support Trump if Trump were indicted and he were the nominee. Some of the chat's going to get me some of the other stuff that DeSantis has flip-flopped on. Refusing
write these down so I cover them in order.
Ukraine. Well, let's go with Ukraine, because the argument is that he's basically sucking and blowing when it comes to Ukraine. And some people are saying that his position on that has been attenuated to the more war whore, warmonger, war hawk type position, because that's what the establishment wants.
So I don't think that's true. And here's why. So I think basically Trump, if you remember, DeSantis had that statement to Tucker Carlson calling the war in Ukraine a territorial dispute, right? That was like, Tucker read it on air and was like, DeSantis is not a neocon, et cetera. And then DeSantis did an interview with Piers Morgan where Piers Morgan asked him if Vladimir Putin was a war criminal. And he was like, yes. And people are like, oh, you've changed your position. It's like, well, no, those positions are consistent. You can on the one hand say Vladimir Putin's a war criminal, which, think about what is the war crime that we convicted all the Japanese leadership of in World War II? Launching an aggressive war. The war in Ukraine is an aggressive war launched by Russia.
Well, no, right? I think you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think the war crimes in World War II had more to do with human experimentation, torture.
Go read the transcripts, dude. This is like what was Tojo indicted for? What were Tojo and his allies indicted for? And his Confederates rather. Launching an aggressive war. That was like war crime number one in the tribunal in Japan. So basically, like, I don't think it's that, saying that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal is a descriptive claim and not a normative one about what the United States policy should be in Ukraine. And in fact, I think saying Vladimir Putin is not a war criminal is actually a pretty hard argument to make, even if, you don't think I don't think we should be at war with Russia. I think our policy in Ukraine was horribly misguided. But like, if you ask me like a simple yes or no on is Vladimir Putin a war criminal, the answer is probably yes. Now, What has
the first thing I pulled up was some of the Japanese war crimes included cannibalism, torture, apparently eating soldiers. I'll look into it. And
I forget where it was.
It's an immaterial point for this discussion anyhow.
Sure. But I guess if you actually, again, and this is where I'd say another thing for people to listen to if they don't believe me is to go watch the exchange between Haley and DeSantis on Ukraine in this last debate. Like, I think DeSantis was pretty clear. Like, he's leaving himself, I'll say this, DeSantis is leaving himself some flexibility to negotiate the end of the war by not saying he'd instantly cut off all aid. But I think if you're thinking about it from the president's perspective, like if you're trying to end the war, you want to at least be able to go to, in your negotiations with the Russians to be able to make a credible case that if you don't make a settlement with us, we will keep funding Ukraine, right? Otherwise, I don't know how you come to a deal. But outside of that, he's no troops. We're way too concerned about Ukraine, not concerned enough about our border. We're funding Ukrainian pensions. That's absurd. In general, the DeSantis grounds his foreign policy in America first. Everything is about American interests, and that's consistent across the way he looks at things. And remember, this is a guy who was in Iraq. He understands, and he's talked about how watching the failure of the Iraq War, profoundly shaped how he viewed foreign policy, and how he has absolutely no time for the neocon hawks like Nikki Haley, and instead is we're going to have a very national interest focused foreign policy, which is in effect very similar to what Trump did. And foreign policy is my number one issue personally. I care a lot about how we do foreign policy. So if I thought DeSantis was a neocon, I would not have worked for him. I have contempt for nobody more than Bill Kristol. But he's not. DeSantis is not a neocon. And I think people have made too much of that statement that he made on Piers Morgan about Putin being a war criminal to try and suggest that he's flip-flopping on Ukraine, when I really don't think he has.
Hold on, let me add this. There's one in here. I want to read it just so that the person doesn't think I'm not reading it. Super Buff Shaft, very interesting name, says, "This is sad, Viva. I sent you Jova Pulitzer's Arizona forensics audit with RSB and Right Side Broadcast News on Rumble. And you and others can't even look. Don't be judgmental. A lot of people send us a lot of stuff. Won't interview him. Okay, going to be nice and not assume that you're assuming ill intent. Only one to look at 2.1 million ballots. He has your 100% proof. On top of the videos of Ruby Freeman and others rerunning ballots in Georgia, 2,000 mules, tons of state hearings, only on OAN News. Do you read the Gateway Pundit? Come on, tons of proof, 3 years. And I'm not sure if that's intended to be as critical as it sounds of me, but okay, I've read it. And by the way, I've screen grabbed it, and I do my best, everybody out there, but a lot of requests come in on a daily basis. Plus, the question is actually at this point in time, what you focus the emphasis on in terms of affecting change for the imminent future. Mm-hmm. Okay, so calling Putin a war criminal might, according to some, display a very superficial, simplistic, media-based understanding of the conflict in Russia-Ukraine.
I mean, maybe, or it could just have been a straight answer to a pretty simple question. As I said, I think the answer, I don't like American policy in Ukraine. I think it's been a disaster. I think we should be basically putting, our ideal policy is one where we're basically forcing Ukraine to the table and making, if they have to make territorial concessions, so be it. But this war needs to come to an end. And that should have been done a year ago. And even given that that's my position, which is in the scheme of positions not friendly to Ukraine, I would still answer the question, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal, with a yes. This is just a descriptive question about what, the actions that his army has taken and what in launching an aggressive war.
Arkansas crime attorney is a lawyer as well,
Mm-hmm.
Will, and so he makes a point, but I'll steelman it.
Yeah.
Hold on, he just said foreign policy is my number one issue. Yet the first part will praise Trump and said the best part of Trump was his foreign policy. This is proven, and this not DeSantis.
That's actually, and that's the best case for Trump, right? I think that's the single best case for Trump, and I would respect Trump and their team a lot more if they went for this argument, which is foreign policy is the thing the president has the most influence on. Trump did a great job on foreign policy. DeSantis hasn't been tested in the same way on foreign policy, so we should go with the sure thing. That said, I basically am relying on having followed DeSantis very closely for a long time and knowing him pretty well to say I think DeSantis will be as good or better than Trump on foreign policy. And I think DeSantis will be much, much, much more effective on domestic policy and managing the White House and the executive branch.
You do not seem like one of the DeSantis supporters who will categorically or say whether or not what you do behind closed doors. You don't seem like the type who's going to say, I'm not going to vote for Trump if Trump is the nominee.
Oh no, I'll vote for Trump if he's the nominee. I'd vote for Trump over Haley, right? Like if you want I did a candidate tier list on Twitter, which annoyed some people, but DeSantis, Vivek, Trump, down on the floor is Haley. Like I'm not willing to let the party go back to her. Like,
well, I think you made a lot of friends right there with that one answer. And the funny thing is, I swap out your DeSantis for Trump, and I'd go Trump, Vivek, DeSantis, Haley, and it's only because I as far as outsider goes, DeSantis has been a good governor, but a lot of the stuff that he's done during this campaign has caused me to question some judgment, some loyalty, not in the sense of loyalty to Trump, but rather loyalty to a process. I did not like the hush money question. I didn't like what he said about January 6ers. I think it's extremely, it's pandering to what I think he wants what he thinks people want to hear, that January 6th was this horrible thing. And it's one of the narratives that I absolutely loathe and think that the DeSantis, hashtag Team DeSantis, are dishonest for pushing, that January 6th was an insurrection. I don't know what your position is on that.
I don't think he's ever said it's an insurrection.
I'm not trying to.
I do.
I'm not putting words into his mouth about calling it an insurrection, but he said it's a disgrace, anti-American, whatever exactly he said. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth.
Somebody asked him if it was a display of patriotism, and he said no. Right, that was the big question that people got.
That was the question, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. It's the gist, not the verbiage.
I mean, maybe, but like we can talk about January. I view it as a riot. I was watching it. I was really disappointed. I know that like there's this big thing about like how many federal law enforcement and was it provoked, and it's like okay, but like there was still like a lot of bad behavior in the Capitol from Trump supporters. Like it doesn't have to be an insurrection for it to like not be like bad behavior. And so it's sort of, I think they've gone way crazy in terms of throwing the book at people. And DeSantis has said this, right? Like, we're going to do a lot of commutations here because a lot of these sentences are way out of line, right? Like, people like Joe Biggs get it. I know Joe Biggs. He got like 17 years, 18 years. Like, no, this is compared to other sentences. Like, this stuff all needs to be commuted way down. But that doesn't mean like, I view January 6th as like a positive day. No, I don't. And I think that, that's another thing where I guess MAGA is expecting him, to say something he doesn't think, right? Like he clearly doesn't think January 6th was a good day. Most people don't. Well, and then that would also be a political loser because it's an 80-20 issue going the wrong way for Republicans.
Well, that's I do fault him in as much as I like him for not saying that January 6th was a Fed, I mean, he doesn't have to say Fed surrection. That might be too conspiratorial. But to say that it was a setup that has been weaponized to go after Trump supporters, I think he needs to be more categorical on that.
Well, here's the thing, and this is actually a difference, I think, where I actually have a problem with Trump, and it's not the same way everybody else does for his January 6th conduct. Trump should have known that none of this was going to work. Right. He should have known. He had people telling him this is not going to work. This is a bad idea. He did.
There is the video of Alex Jones. If Alex Jones knew and Trump was listening to Alex Jones back in 2016, I mean, things happened fast. And I think Trump had an idealistic version in his mind of what a patriotic protest was going to look like. And nobody knew how deep they were going to go. I mean, we got the hint with Russia. We got the hint with impeachment number one. We didn't know they were going to go this deep or this low. It's
like basically, I think. I see him as having a lot of responsibility for what happened to the J6ers, right? Like he was the one who brought them to DC. He was the one who said, go to the Capitol. Like a lot of people are getting caught up on trespassing nonsense. Like if he had, had been smarter and not done the January 6th rally, those people wouldn't have been in DC. Right. And then, so he basically, after that, didn't pardon them, had the ability, it was considered and talked about, did not pardon them. And then, I don't think he donated a dime to their legal defense. Like, and I'm saying someone who knows people who've worked on Fed J6 legal defense, a lot of it, right? Like, and I don't know that he's donated a dime to these people.
Let's take that one by one. Okay. The first one was that they shouldn't have been there. If he were smarter, he would have told them not to go. I mean, some people are going to accuse you, and not in a bad way. I'll say it. That's tantamount to saying, let the Democrats actually suppress constitutional rights of assembly and protest. They shouldn't have been there because we're gonna fuck up their lives. And now what did you learn? Don't come back the next time. That's exactly what they wanted.
This is like, I am not that sympathetic to that argument because like Trump as president is in a position to know what's going to happen to his people. And like, it's part of, his responsibility is to like keep your people out of trouble, like, and keep your people from falling into traps. Right. And my view is it's like, oh, well, you're saying we can't protest. It's like, I'm not saying that, but I'm also saying like at the time, especially, you got to recognize like, be smart. You can, no matter how unjust it is, like people getting tossed in jail and having their lives ruined over this was not worth it. And it just wasn't worth it, and it was unnecessary. And like, that's not a criticism of them in the sense of like, having whatever the righteousness of the cause. This is a very separate pragmatic question about like, what are you exposing your supporters to by bringing them to DC on January 6th?
Okay, so
that's part one.
Yep.
Part two is didn't pardon them. Part three is didn't donate to their legal defense.
Well, part 2 and 3, I think, are part and parcel of the same thing, which is how much could he have assisted them afterwards. It is a few of the Trump team got it mistaken that they hadn't even been identified. He couldn't have pardoned them, but he could have done a preemptive pardon that would have encompassed a lot of people. He would have, and I'm trying to think of like this. It's not a question of cowardice. He would have been convicted on impeachment had he done that.
Yeah, so leaders throw themselves on protect your people. Like that's part of owning the mistake. Like say he was impeached for that.
Yeah, but what do you think happened? What do you think
that's
happens?
The right thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
What do you think?
Protect your people from like how many person years of people in jail, of his own supporters in jail, are those more important than him not running for president again? I feel like he's using his supporters and he's not taking responsibility and he's letting them like suffer.
Well, let me flip you. Let me turn your own argument against you. He's trying to protect his own people. He knows damn well if he gets impeached, January 6th might look like a field day. If he gets convicted, barred from running again, after people were convinced 2020 was stolen, there'll be something on steroids compared to January 6th.
That's what he was thinking. It looks pretty clear that, if you actually read the reporting, it seems like he was pretty clear that his lawyers told him he couldn't pardon himself, so he didn't pardon anybody. And there's a very good clip. Here's who you should listen to on this point. It's Roger Stone. He won't like this, but Roger Stone. Roger Stone was, being trailed by a Danish documentary filmmaker right in the aftermath of J6. There's a clip
I know they got something on video.
They got Roger Stone basically being like, he is being absolutely selfish. This is ridiculous. He should be issuing these pardons. You should go watch that clip because Roger Stone at the time, he was very angry, and he won't say it now because, Trump looks like he's in good shape, but he said back then he said it, and boy, was he viciously critical of Trump for failing to issue those pardons. And I don't know. I think there's, he can make his own excuses for why he didn't do it, but I think those excuses are weak tea. And also I'm tired of hearing excuses. I want a guy who I don't need to worry about.
But meanwhile, you got plenty. You're plenty sympathetic to excuses from DeSantis. It's not my super PAC. I'm doing excuses.
I feel like that's a really compelling one. Like he legally, unlike Trump, who legally could issue the pardon, DeSantis cannot manage a super PAC. That's a pretty important distinction. I expect you to do what's in your legal power, not to do what's not in your legal power. And if they had actually demonstrated that he didn't, Julie Kelly, I know, has tried to argue that he didn't have the legal power to do this, but it's just wrong. Like Jimmy Carter.
Well, that is the preemptive pardon on unspecified people. I don't think it's a disputed legal question. I think it had to go back to Richard Nixon's. I think it goes back to Watergate. I forget exactly the context. It had to do with Nixon. I forget the context. Someone in Rumble said he couldn't. They were not convicted or arrested. Couldn't have pardoned them. It's not true. And so everybody has to make sure. Just don't repeat a bad talking point. I think Julie Kelly got that wrong, and I like Julie Kelly does great work. Everyone's entitled to get it wrong of good faith. Okay, so it was not helping with the legal fees and not pardoning, preemptive pardons. That is one I'm going to have to struggle with. I know people could say it. Then he gets impeached. Then he gets convicted, and they undoubtedly would have, because that's collusion to overturn. And now he's forgiving his insurrectionists. I think you're victim blaming, is what I think.
I'm victim blaming for say he led the people and failed to their legal defense.
No, you are
his supporters. I'm not victim blaming.
No. Well, I think in a way, I think you are, because basically what you're saying is, he's dealing with demonic forces that are hell-bent on burning the country down before letting him ever get reelected. And he should remove himself from that in order to placate the destroyers who would destroy the country merely so they could rule over the ashes.
I don't see it that way at all. I think it's about protecting your people, right?
Well,
like,
but
what is the point of this? Is he's not going to protect his people?
Protect his people
and then for him to be constantly demanding loyalty. Like, I mean, God, I've heard so much about loyalty, right? Like, people have called me a traitor. Like, you go find what Laura Loomer said about me, obnoxious stuff, right? Loyalty. I'm disloyal to Trump. Sorry, Trump was disloyal to the J6ers when he had the opportunity to pardon them and failed, and then had the opportunity to donate to their legal defense and failed. Sorry, why? Like, the loyalty, pragmatism. If I thought he was the best candidate, but you tell me I need to be loyal to the guy after that?
No, forget the loyalty argument. It's not something I make. I want to pick on the victim blaming because I still think that's exactly what you're doing. You're basically saying they are so dirty, they are so evil, they are so hell-bent on destruction that he should remove himself from the re-election pool in order to placate their ravenous, destructive desires. I mean, that's
not the reason, right? Like, the reason I think, he is ultimately responsible for those people being there. And he's also responsible for, he was told this wouldn't work, right? That's the thing. Like, that's why I say this project of his to try and take back and especially post like December when all the votes had been certified, this idea that we would like have a rally on January 6th and get Mike Pence.
You'd have a rally.
Nonsense.
You would have a rally. You would have a rally where people would express their discontent. But this is like when you say they shouldn't have been there. It's like I'm not a victim blamer. I would say don't wear a tight high skirt and walk the streets at 3 a.m. You don't deserve it, but you're certainly raising the likelihood of that happening. The Trump.
This is exactly the logic, right? It's like
no, but it's not because protesting on the Capitol is not the same exposure to risk as running around half naked in a bad area at 3 a.m. as a single woman. It's just not. One is a constitutional bloody right that you're supposed to have, and what you're basically saying is he's got to protect his people from the unconstitutional, destructive tendencies of people with no morals who will stop at nothing, as if that would have even done something.
Well, he was in charge of that institution. He was the president. Yes, he's not some random person. He was the president with the power to control for at least 2 more weeks what those people did. And the plenary power of the pardon. And it's like he could have exercised it. He didn't. And he did it out of his own person because he thought he would suffer personal consequences for protecting others. Just sorry, I don't that excuse. Like I don't see it as very valid.
I don't claim to know his thought process. Going for the immediate selfishness is the easy one. Imagine he mass pardons everybody. So you don't have 840 years of prison time that Biden is so happy about. He gets impeached, he gets convicted, and now you have 75 million people who think the election was stolen, who now see that their candidate can't run again. A, you think the Democrats would stop then? Or the deep state, the FBI, you think they would stop then? And B, you think that wouldn't lead to a worse circumstance than the one that we have right now?
Oh, I don't think it would necessarily lead to a worse circumstance. I think most people would have looked at January 6th and said, okay, let's not do that again, given that we know that like there's, all these arrests were going to happen. But that said, I don't think that consequentialist reasoning even went through Trump's mind. And as a result, I don't think you can use it to absolve him for his actions. Like he wasn't thinking like, oh, well, the logical conclusion of me pardoning everybody would be me being impeached and convicted in a much worse riot. Like, I don't think how about went through his mind.
How about just the destruction of American democracy that the demonic forces have won? They got their way. Trump never again on the ballot.
I mean, I don't think that people at the time were even thinking about him running again in 24. Like that wasn't.
Oh, no. I think they were. I mean,
and moreover, it's like, the victory is like the demonic forces have won. Like it's an election. I don't know. I mean, he already lost the election.
No, but that's the thing.
Like
it's not
the idea that preserving the possibility of a 2024 Trump presidency at age 77 was more important than those people's lives. I just think is not true.
Well, but I'll tell you this.
It's a very selfish calculation for him to make in particular, because he's the one who would suffer. He's the one who suffered the consequences, and others, the people he's responsible for bringing to the Capitol, are the one who suffer the consequences of him not doing anything. I find it weak. I think he absolutely should have pardoned those people. I think the And he could have directly saved hundreds of his most, serious supporters decades of jail time, and didn't do it because, and he hasn't really explained himself why. Like, other than making the false claim that he couldn't have.
I don't think he made that. I don't know that he made that claim. I want to fact check you on that because I don't want any DeSantis
Right, maybe I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure he made that claim, but I don't know what his actual stated reason is for not issuing those pardons.
And I'll read Heartland Denizen in Rumble says, not quite victim blaming, but appeasement of maligned partisan Democrats. Still a reasonable point in my judgment that he could have. That's why I think it's look, nobody can call your position stupid and absolutely outlandish. I just don't know what would have been the better circumstance. That not only do they win an election that people think was stolen, they then successfully criminalize protest, because even though they get pardoned, like you just said, they learned the lesson, don't do that again. So they criminalize protest, a constitutional right, while simultaneously barring for future re-election the man who they just stole the election from, and then strong-armed out of politics, out of democracy
altogether.
The right
answer here was, once the legal challenges ran their course, and this is by like mid-December, a concession, right? Not even a concession that it was rightful, that it was good, but like, rather than this stunt that he tried, which was like we are going to fight to have Mike Pence not count electoral votes. Like, that was a serious discussion in the White House. That wasn't fake. That was real. They were really going to try and see if they could flip the results on January 6th itself. And it's like, I think that was obviously not going to work. A stupid attempt. He shouldn't have, his lawyers were telling him, this will not work. You should just concede. Like, we're out of, we are out of options here legally. And if he had done that, no January 6th at all, right? Like, no jail time at all, no massive increase in, imprisonment and surveillance on Trump supporters at all. Like, that was the right play. It just was the right play. Like, sometimes you lose not fair and square, but like, you lose.
Some people are going to take
L, like, then
people are going to take big issues.
Things happen. Then worse things happen, like January 6th.
Yeah, but then
not being able to take an L are really bad.
Well, but some people are going to disagree with your first point. Sometimes you just lose to unfair people, and this minimize the evil. I'm not sure that's going to be a convincing argument.
Well, then you learn the lesson for next time, right? Like,
what's that lesson? Don't protest, don't object, don't contest,
but rather,
or you'll go to jail.
In the pre-election litigation, be like unbelievably focused.
Yeah, well, no, this is true. You can only make the best decision at that given point in time. I'll say this: someone raised it in Rumble, and it's not a bad point. You fault Trump for not pardoning them, and DeSantis has been considering pardons and commutations. A lot of people are going to criticize DeSantis for being nowhere near vocal enough in terms of the support that he would give as president to the January 6th.
I think they just haven't seen his speeches. Like, he's made clear that there's massive injustice done. There are going to need to be like serious commutations done early in the presidency, not at the beginning, or I'm sorry, not at the very end. Have we talked about Trump's pardons? Good God. Think about how bad those pardons were. He pardoned Kwame Kilpatrick, the Democrat mayor of Detroit, right? The corrupt Democrat mayor of Detroit, and didn't pardon Assange or, the pardon list. He pardoned Solomon.
No, we will agree on that. We will agree that there were some very remarkable absentee names from the pardon, including, I think, from our end, or from I had covered this, Brian Colfage from the We Build the Wall indictment, pardoned Bannon, but not Colfage.
That's a bad one. Right?
It was a bad one, and I was saying, like, if I were Bannon, maybe I would have even not accepted the pardon if it didn't include my co-defendants, like leave them high and dry. But whatever, some legit criticism, and some of it Robert Barnes and I have talked about, and the pardon list was one of them. Some people say they would have just had he pardoned Assange, but who knows? And Snowden and what was the other one?
There's always a reason, right? Like, there's always a reason for him not to do the right thing.
There's good arguments and there's bad arguments. And one of the bad arguments, Will, that you have been guilty of running on Twitter is Trump should be at these debates. This is why people are accusing, and I think rightfully so, DeSantis of sucking and blowing on January 6th, because, I'll pardon them, but while it's politically convenient and expedient, I'll milk the January 6th for my own political profit because it handcuffs and tongue-ties Trump, and he gets to use it for his own political campaign profit. And so you and others have been running this point, Trump, and DeSantis, and Chris Christie. And if you're arguing a Chris Christie point, in as much as you want to fault me for the Nikki Haley argument, you're running a Chris Christie talking point. Trump should be
it's
up
an
on the
opponent to Trump talking point, right? He should show up.
Oh yeah, when you
Like,
say it's an opponent,
I don't think it's not a neocon argument or a populist
no,
argument.
When I do it, it's a Nikki Haley.
We're not Donald Trump and we're running for president argument.
No, but like when I do it, I'm making a Nikki Haley argument. When you do it, I'll say it's a Chris Christie argument, but I'm joking. It's a bad argument. You say that he needs to be up on that debate stage, and
Yes.
everybody. Well, let me see. Do you agree or disagree with my assessment that it either creates legal exposure for him or it creates political exploitation from his interlocutors, that they can ask questions and make accusations that they know he cannot answer and then hold it against him?
So yes, there's legal exposure. No, it doesn't create unique opportunities for his interlocutors.
Well, hold on. You can't say the second if you admitted the first.
But here's the point. So I'll explain. Right, the legal exposure comes from extemporaneous speaking. Right, like if you were a lawyer. So we're both lawyers, right?
Despite what everyone thinks, I practiced for 13 years actively.
Yeah.
I had my own law firm.
Right. Okay. So we're both lawyers. Okay. A client comes into our office and says, "Hi, I'm being indicted in 4 different jurisdictions on 4 different serious white-collar criminal charges within the span of 4 months. Do you think it's wise for me to be speaking extemporaneously about anything in relation to my prosecutions?" You'd be like, if you're just giving strict legal advice, which is you're the lawyer, you're trying to minimize your client's legal exposure, you'd be like, shut up, stop talking, no admissions, like do not talk in public. Right. Okay. So my point being that like extemporaneous speaking from any criminal defendant is something that as a criminal defense lawyer, you just shudder because you're just like, please, there's nothing good that can come of it. All you're doing is creating possible admissions to be used against you in court. Right. Okay.
Agreed.
So but Trump's running for president. Okay. He kind of has to speak extemporaneously somewhat, right? Like he can't give nothing but prepared speeches. My point was, I don't think there's a distinction, a meaningful one at least, between the legal exposure he gets from doing a town hall with questions he does not have in advance from both the audience and Brett Baer and Martha McCallum versus a debate where he's getting extemporaneous questions primarily from the moderators and then occasionally having to engage. And the second point you make is like, oh, well, he give this interlocutor as a problem because he can be like, he can always respond with something like, if somebody tries to make him answer a question that would like somehow violate the gag.
Yeah, like ask him a question, DeSantis, or let's just say Nikki Haley, we have a common enemy, turns to Trump and says, do you think that you accuse Pence of being a traitor? Do you still stand by that? And I know what you're going to say. He should just answer, Haley. Oh, you just muted yourself. Oh, Will, talk.
Yeah, sorry. I can you hear me?
Yeah, but your audio just changed radically.
I know what happened. I think it switched my mic. Hold on. Let me go. Now this should work.
Yeah, that's better. Okay. So Nikki Haley's going to say, you accuse Trump of being Pence of being a traitor who should be hanged. What do you have to say for yourself? And he'll say, you know that I'm under criminal charges and I can't ask that. What an unfair question, you Jane.
Yeah. How dare you, right? Like that's the opportunity, right? Like you remind, like this is, and it would be a huge opportunity for him to be like, don't you remember that I've been indicted 4 times by the very people who like are coming at me? Like he could turn it around. Like I see it as, I don't think there's a unique opportunity to like leverage the gag order against him because the fact of the indictments is like the thing that unites the Republican base behind him. So, I mean, he could just get indignant about like, I can't answer that for obvious reasons because I'm under the most vicious legal attack that any person has ever been under, 4 different indictments in 4 different jurisdictions in 4 months. Like, get out of here. I mean, it would just be an opportunity for him. And moreover, I think the bigger issue is Trump's not thinking that way, right? Like Trump's not deciding to do this town hall as opposed to a debate in order to minimize legal exposure. Again, if he were trying to minimize legal exposure, he would shut up. But speeches.
That's different. I mean, and this is why I think if I say who wins this exchange, it's going to be me, because even if Nikki Haley does, I think it is a question of there's no point, set aside he's kicking their ass, he has no business being on a stage with losers. I don't think that's the best argument. You know damn well the establishment wants Nikki Haley over DeSantis for some reason. The media wants Nikki Haley over DeSantis for some reason. Trump can have the most wittiest, needlingest response to Nikki Haley. Headline is going to be Trump refuses to answer, and that's what they're going to run with. Now, it may or may not.
This is belied by 2016, where Trump was given constantly unfair media coverage by in the aftermath of the debates by the media. And yet it was the debates that elevated him. Like the debates are why Trump won, like his demolition of Jeb Bush, right? His demolition of Marco Rubio. Like he won, he was like, but remember before the debates happened, he was like at 1%, 2%, like he wasn't high in the polls. It was the debates that made him. And I see it as like, what the media would be unfair. Like, to me, all this is stuff like, what he wants to do. He wants to be able to just slander DeSantis about COVID, not defend his record, and like say a bunch of stuff about DeSantis, but not to his face where he can respond. And I'm sorry, like, that's some wuss stuff, right? Like, I can't respect it. And I can't respect also, like, you're 77, you have an obligation to demonstrate that you're still up to this and you're at your highest level. You do that by going to a debate stage. And like, here's the real pragmatic problem, right? This is an actual serious pragmatic problem with Trump's strategy. Why does Biden have to debate if it's Trump v. Biden? Trump turned them all down. Biden's just going to be like, no, we're not debating. Like, and what's Trump going to say? He has nothing to say to that. So we don't get any presidential debates, and we don't get to expose Biden as incompetent.
No, I just
like,
say
on a debate stage.
Not analogous. Primaries are not the same as the general, so nobody would agree with that comparison.
Why would Biden care about that distinction? It's a distinction of that difference from Biden's perspective. He'll just be like, you were the first, like, in a serious, without an incumbent, right? There's no incumbent in the Republican nomination. You're the first Republican nominee, non-incumbent Republican nominee to not go through it, to turn down debates. Like, and you're going to tell me I need to debate you? Nah. Like, it's just,
Will. They're not debating. I mean, what's his face? Biden's not debating anyhow. Trump could be, as you know, he could do everything right. They're still going to screw him. So,
but like, if
that argument doesn't work.
That would be like embarrassing. Him not debating Trump just makes sense. Like, I think he's weakening in order to avoid potentially being exposed and having his record exposed and like losing his temper. In order to avoid all that in the primary, he's giving Joe Biden a massive asset in the general. And I can't respect that either. I think it's bad for the party. I think he should show up. I think, like, everybody agreed in the Arizona governor debate when what's her face, Carrie Lake, and wanted to debate, I forget who the current governor.
Katie Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs refused to debate. Everybody's like, that's appalling. It's disrespectful to democracy. Like, that was all right. Those critiques were correct. Trump's doing it now. Saying, my position hasn't changed. Candidates should debate. Guy who wants to be president of the United States and isn't willing to, like, stand on stage with his, like, the people competing against him.
This is the thing, like, barring the indictment, barring how I know DeSantis and Haley would weaponize it, exploit it for political profit, given his handcuffs. If that weren't there, I think I'd agree with you. I think the only problem is we've seen how they've weaponized and politically profited from the persecution. They wouldn't shy away from doing it if they got him in a debate. Well, and hell, if he said something a bridge too far and then it got him into even more criminal trouble, they'd love it. They would love it. And they would use it.
He does extemporaneous interviews all the time. This is not a guy.
It's true.
He's doing it for who's paying attention to legal advice to be quiet. Like, that's the reason we have all these gag orders in the first place.
Oh no, we have gag orders because. No, but we have gag orders. There would have been gag orders had he said, Engeron's got a nice.
Maybe, but like he's been very, like, I don't mind it, right? I think it's fine, but I'm just saying, like, if I were putting on my lawyer hat on and Donald Trump were my client, I'd just be like head in hands constantly over his public statements. Like, it'd be a nightmare. I don't know if you ever defended somebody like that but like, whatever you want to think of Donald Trump as a potential president, he's a nightmare client. As a lawyer, just a nightmare client.
I'm bringing this one up because this is Ginger Ninja said, debate Mike Pence when a judge has him gagged in a criminal court. So now, this is a good point. There's no look. Let's get one concession. He should not have debated when Mike Pence was a candidate. Correct?
I mean, I think he still should have debated then, but it should have been at a minimum like Mike, I can't answer. Like, I think the same tactic works. Like, Mike, I can't answer that. I can't discuss that.
They're going to say I can't discuss that is intimidation. I mean, there's no depth. They'll say, I can't discuss that. He was intimidating, suggesting violence, that he's going to silence him. I mean, this literally nothing.
They could try and say anything, but it wouldn't fly, right? Like, they're going to get a violation of a gag order on him refusing to answer a question related to the gag order. Like,
dude, what are they? I don't think it's a bridge. I don't think it's unreasonable to think it. Okay, hold on. Let's get some more questions here. There's some good ones in our locals community. We got Shofar says, I'm too old to be fooled by politicians. I have seen it all. I don't trust DeSantis as president, commander-in-chief. That's fine. Arkansas crime attorney, this is the same argument all rhinos make. Lay down and accept the fraud. It was stolen fair and square, says Joe Maskew.
That's not what I said.
No. I think, hold on. Is he saying? Yeah. No, I think he's quoting Arkansas crime attorney.
Oh, yeah.
Then we got, no, is it true he could do a blanket pardon? He could have. No, it is not true. He could do a blanket pardon. However, did anyone even believe they would put people in prison for a protest? I'm wondering, I have to go back and remember, I think they were coming out hard
I'm pretty sure Jacob Chansley was arrested within 4 days. Like,
no, and I'm pretty sure people were turning themselves in the next day. Like, so it wasn't as it was
So like
totally
this
unexpected.
was, and there are news reports about the fact that blanket pardons were being discussed. There's also the Roger Stone clip about how like he was demanding pardons from the White House and in contact with people in the White House who told him it wasn't happening. So like this is.
And I can't bring up these comments. It's in our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community. Bill Brown says, imposing power doesn't sound very democratic, does it? Bill Brown says he can't even handle high heels scandal, but he's going to ace being president. That's a fair point. But when he was on Patrick Bet David and he got flustered over the joke, I don't know DeSantis. He seems like, I don't want to be judgmental. He doesn't look like he has a good sense of humor.
He's actually pretty funny, oddly enough, but it's like a dry, like he's not like Trump, right? Like they're very different guys. Like DeSantis is a reader. He's an introvert, but like he's ruthless. Like, and ultimately, I think this is sort of the difference between, do you want a deal maker or like a ruthless lawyer as your president in a world where we don't want bipartisanship, where we want to win? And I think the answer is you want a ruthless lawyer.
Holy crap. We've been going for 10 minutes shy of 2 hours, Will. Okay. Geez, we'll start winding this up. I don't want to be selfish or greedy with your time.
You're not. Like I'm here and I got,
okay, cool.
I said Friday I was free. I'm free. So like,
awesome. We got DeSantis disqualified himself when he jumped in early because of donor pressure. It showed a lack of discipline. That's from Kenny Diaz. I can't.
I mean, he jumped in late. If anything, there were people telling him to jump in for 5 months beforehand. Trump was accusing him of running a shadow campaign. Like he didn't jump in early.
Baldwin says if Trump is not elected president, then the Democrats and the deep state will continue to use legal warfare, election interference, and we will become a single party nation. Trump's win is about stopping future election interference. I agree with that, Will. I mean,
I totally disagree with that. And here's my basic argument. Basically, Democrats were able to co-opt the Department of Justice from Trump, even though Trump had the legal authority to stop them. DeSantis won't let that happen. The way to stop Democrats from controlling the Department of Justice is not to elect Donald Trump, it's to elect Ron DeSantis.
Let me ask you. A lot of people saying DeSantis was too early. DeSantis is very useful. He could have been great. How about DeSantis? I mean, DeSantis could have been. He's still governor. I don't know how this might have played out. He could have, for all of his expertise and wisdom, could have been part of the administration and then run in 2028.
I mean, I can't. Why would he want to do that? Like,
well, why would he want to gain the experience? Why would he want to gain the experience, save the system, make sure the deep state doesn't work,
like working
and then
for
be
Trump,
president?
I mean, as an attorney general, Trump wasn't very nice to his attorney generals. Even somebody like Bill Barr, who did a lot to help him.
Oh, Bill Barr was a snake in the grass. He wasn't.
I think people have underestimated Bill Barr. Bill Barr did a lot, and it's not just Bill Barr. Like you look at the way that Trump. This is something I really didn't like about Trump. Trump publicly criticized his own sitting cabinet secretaries who he had the authority to fire. Like, if your employer ever decided to besmirch you in public rather than talk to you privately, like you'd be really offended, rightfully so, and quit. Like, the thing that I found obnoxious about that was, like, these are people. It's one thing when Trump tries to berate and bully members of Congress who he doesn't have firing authority over, right? They have their positions. That's public politics. It's another thing entirely when he's publicly berating his sitting cabinet secretaries who report to him and serve at his pleasure. Like, that's terrible, terrible leadership. And so I can't imagine, like, DeSantis, who's currently the governor of the third biggest state of the union, I mean, and he said this, would have any interest in serving under Donald Trump. Because, like, here's another thing, I make this point, like, and this is somebody I like. I don't hate Donald Trump. I like him, and I support him.
He's your number two. You're not pulling a Cardillo and
saying, he's my number three. Like, but he's not. I don't hate him. I like the Trump presidency, and in terms of foreign policy, especially, and I think he's really funny. Like,
no,
okay, all that aside,
you're being attracted by a younger woman, and shame on you for shame on you.
Sort of like Donald Trump. Anyway, I'm sorry,
but I'm being pissed. All right,
all right, right, yeah. You gave me an easy one. But the point is, like, Laura Loomer and people have been like, we are going to blacklist all the DeSantis supporters from the Trump administration. Will Chamberlain's going to try and sneak back into MAGA and work for the administration. I'm like, you couldn't pay me to work for Donald Trump. I don't want to go bankrupt. The guy doesn't do a good job protecting his people from legal exposure. Like, and this is the James Comey thing I talked about earlier. It's where the lack of disciplined communications and, like, just not being a sharp operator means that you're just, like, opening up a lot of avenues of attack that other people wouldn't. So, like, I had no problem working for DeSantis. I would happily work for DeSantis any day of the week. But even in a world where I vote for Trump and want him to be the president over Biden, there's no world where I'd work in his administration. No.
Well, I would say that's the deep state Democrats, weaponized agencies that have successfully deterred anybody from wanting to have anything to do with Trump because they'll destroy everybody in his orbit.
It's not, but it's not about what the Democrats would do, right? Democrats would hate DeSantis too. Like, oh boy, like you should see how much Democrats hate DeSantis in Florida. Like they despise the guy. He was the most loathed governor in the country from Democrats. They would try everything against him. The reason I'd work for DeSantis over Trump is because DeSantis is more legally sophisticated and runs a more disciplined operation. Like, and that's important, and that's a reason he'll be a more effective president for y'all. And it's the reason that I would be somebody who'd be willing to work for him. Right? People don't understand this. Like, I could have worked for Trump if I wanted to be on the Trump campaign. I had all the connections I needed. Like Jack Posobiec was the best man at my wedding. I knew tons of people in the Trump administration. I was a fervent supporter of him for 4 years. I was the guy who filmed the election, the poll watcher coming out of the polling place. If I wanted to work for Trump, I could have. I didn't for a reason.
Let me see here. In the chat, we got Trump's greatest failure is his inability to manage his hires in his first term. DeSantis' issue for me is his intentional use of Republican insiders in his campaign and his sketchy foreign policy instincts. That's from Baldwin. Bill Brown wants me to ask you about the Ron's clown. Oh, ask Tim Pool about Ron's clowns online. I don't know what that is, Bill. Okay, we got Twitter is a digital graffiti, says Kenny Diaz. Hey, Viva, does anybody truly believe DeSantis is a real populist, says Victor Cardone?
I mean, I do. Like, I've watched him. Like, he takes it seriously. Like, what has he done in Florida? I mean, he was the best governor in the country on COVID. Like, contrary to what Donald Trump wants to say, like he was the guy who like fought back against Fauci, fought back against.
Well, he fought back. Okay. I'm prepared to put DeSantis and Trump on the same moral plane when it comes to COVID. I don't think anyone gets to criticize the other, but I think they're both doing they're both criticizing each other for things that I think are probably true of both of them. He set up that grand jury for Pfizer. Mm-hmm. What's he done with it, Will?
Well, he can't. I mean, it's a grand jury. He's not in charge of it. He said he can set it up. It has to like report. He can't. So what? But I guess it's not like that's not a thing. It's
what has it done?
He actually controls.
What has it done?
Like he can set it up. He just can't. I mean, that's on the attorneys.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I mean, this is not an attack. It's done. It has not done anything yet.
I mean, it's probably working on its report. Like it took a while. He set up one on illegal immigration. It took a few years to come out with a report. Like grand juries need to report. Like you just can't. You can't force a grand jury to do anything as a sitting executive.
What does QED mean? It says
quod erat demonstratum, like basically saying like I have proven my point logically.
Washington D.C. hates Trump more than DeSantis, says Joe Mascu. QED, and Ginger Ninja says Biden already stopped showing up against Trump to general election debates in 2020. How did we forget this? Did they stop showing up?
They did 3 debates, right? He agreed to 3 debates, but like this time it'll be 0. And...
Biden is not going to be on the ticket. Period. He's not going to be the one.
How much you want to bet? This is like I feel like Republicans are way too aggressive. Biden's this very for all his problems, he's still the incumbent president. Man. He's going to be there.
You don't live in Florida.
I do live in Florida.
Huh, so we could make this happen over drinks. I'll bet you a martini.
Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah, Biden's not going to be.
Are you in Miami or where?
No, I'm like 45 minutes north of Miami.
Okay, yeah, I'm in Tallahassee, obviously.
That's too far away. I just drove through. Wait, did I just drive through? Tallahassee is like up and then never each way to the west as you hit Alabama.
Yeah, it's like in the middle of the panhandle, if you will.
I'm certain when I drove to Alabama, I drove through Tallahassee, right?
Yeah, you would. You would.
Yeah, that was actually like there were some mild rolling hills there and trees. It was like there weren't just palm trees.
No, I could show you my whole house. Like there's tons of trees in the backyard. It's beautiful. Like it feels. It's more like southern Georgia. In terms of like the geography,
okay, cool, and it was remarkably cooler than where I am. We're like less humid and
it's chilly.
Will, I think we've done it. I mean, first of all, I'm glad we did this because whenever you do needles on Twitter, I don't want people taking them literally or too personally.
Yeah.
And then there was a misunderstanding where I thought you were telling me that I was reading from a script, and then
No, I was talking about Trump, right?
Yeah, and then I could have, if I wanted to be stubborn, I could have said, well, even accusing Trump of reading from a script, one of the biggest criticisms against DeSantis is he's saying those same bloody lines over. There's a new sheriff in town. Someone tell him to stop saying that. Okay, it's embarrassing whenever he says it. Well, someone's going to tell him there's a new sheriff in town. We heard you say it 3 times a debate for the last 4 debates. Pick another. Okay. You've presented a very rational, compelling presentation. I don't think anyone's going to accuse you of being bad faith. maybe a little, not straw manning, but what were some of the ones where I think, no, even you it's a decent argument on what you think Trump could do to spin the gag order if he participated in a debate. And the picture's fine. I don't think you're really guilty of even having retweeted disinformation or promoted or repeated disinformation.
I try not to. I don't want to get community noted. I don't like that. I try not. I mean, I assume that people will community note me if I tweet false things, like as an independent reason to not want to tweet false things. So.
Let me see what the chat has to say. If there's anything else in here. His love for Bill Barr discredits anything Will says. He didn't say he loves Bill Barr. I think you're wildly wrong. Bill Barr said there was no election
fraud. Read his
fraud.
memoir, guys. Like, you don't like Bill Barr. He wrote a great memoir. He's a really interesting.
No. I don't like Bill Barr, and I know that nobody watching us right now likes Bill Barr.
Fair enough. But still go read his memoir. Like, I would say that he was a 2-time attorney general. Very smart guy, very interesting guy, even if you don't like him.
The only reason I was inclined to like him is because he reminded me of John Goodman, who I think I liked. Now I hate John Goodman because of the degree to which I hate Bill Barr.
People do not give Bill Barr enough credit for ending the Russia investigation, right? That was why he was hired. Jeff Sessions wouldn't do it. Bill Barr came in and got it wrapped up, and he got it wrapped up in a way that didn't get Trump impeached. So, like, over that in particular. They impeached him over Ukraine, but that was different.
What was Bill Barr's connection to Robert Maxwell? I'm going to have to ask Barnes again on Friday, on Sunday. There's a connection there that's sorted, but I lost it with Bill Barr when he said there's no election fraud, and he said it when nobody had looked into it. Now let me see in our locals chat. Viva Frei, how can Will say DeSantis is a populist when he signed away Florida's resign to run law? I don't know what that is. That's from Mr. Mike. Mr. Mike.
That was a law that basically said DeSantis couldn't hold the office of governor and run for president. That has nothing to do with a populist agenda. If anything, if he is a populist and wants to continue to implement populist policies, then it would make sense for him to make sure that he could be governor even in a world where he didn't prevail in the nomination fight.
And now I'm reading Bill Brown's follow-up. It says, every time Tim asks a serious question, Ron's clowns attack him on everything except what Tim asked about. Whether or not they're paid, whether or not it's organized, DeSantis' online supporters, not you, although I'll give you a hard time whenever I see some of the tandem talking points. They seem to be particularly obnoxious. I don't know why, and I don't know if I noticed them more than the Trump.
You guys need to go, just literally, I want y'all to do this. Like, go into Twitter and put in the search bar Laura Loomer, Will Chamberlain, read what she wrote about me.
Well, no,
out of nowhere.
Everybody picks on Laura.
You have Laura Loomer, you have Brendan Dilley. Like, there's basically, I'm not going to hear about how terrible the DeSantis influencers are when, like, the Trump, like, holy cow, some of these people, like, they put Photoshop Christina Pushaw's knees to look redder. And Laura Loomer posted this. But yeah, this was appalling, depraved shit from the Trump people. So I'm sorry, like, you're all like, DeSantis influencers are so bad. Like, you should see the shit that people are willing to say about me.
I think unless I'm going to look to the chat. I'm going to ask for a one for a yes, two for a no. The one yes being, I think even Trump supporters are quite vocal about their dislike for some of the tactics of Laura Loomer. Am I right or am I wrong? One, I'm right. Two, I'm wrong.
Not in, people don't say it. Like, Laura Loomer went out and accused me of being a traitor and, like, all sorts of horrible things. I didn't get single word from some people about how unfair she was being.
That's an opinion. She's entitled to her opinion. I think
moreover, I mean, I didn't see that many people being like, "This is beyond the pale, Laura. How dare you?" Like,
when she doxed Riley Gaines, and she'll argue that she didn't dox her because the information was public. Home address, when she was trying to show that I called her out on that publicly, and a lot of people did. People pick Laura Loomer as the only example every single time, but I think there's a lot of Trump supporters who are quite vocal and quite push back when she does things that are crossing the lines. But
I'm glad you did. I just don't see. Again, this is just I'm speaking from what I see, right?
Yeah, no, and maybe I'm just more amenable. Maybe I'm not in that Twitter silo, so I don't actually see as much of it as I do.
Right, you don't have Trump people in your mentions being mad at you, right?
Because no, every time I engage with an annoying DeSantis supporter, then it just gives me more of those DeSantis supporters.
Right.
Will, so, and what are you doing these days? Where can people follow you? What do you?
All right, yeah, follow me on Twitter at Will Chamberlain, and also follow the Article 3 project and the Internet Accountability Project. There's more advocacy coming there, and I think we'll see. The Substack should be coming soon or something like that. I'm hearing rumors that Twitter should be, but anyway, at Will Chamberlain on Twitter.
At Will Chamberlain, Chamberlain, no underscore, no nothing. Will Chamberlain, not Wilt. And what's the IAP? The
Internet Accountability Project. It's at _IAP.
And what is that exactly?
We fight against big tech censorship and unfair practices by big tech.
That is some of the stuff that I think we can all agree Trump in the first administration ought to have been a little more proactive on. But I don't think anybody could have seen that they were going to at some point ban the sitting president from social media. Who would have thought they would have sunk that low?
Some slopes are slippery. Yeah.
Well, they slippery right into a full free fall, and I think we're in the midst of that free fall. We just got to start growing our wings to save our asses. We'll stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. This has been fantastic, and I'm glad we did it. And thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
Everybody out there, I might be live again this afternoon with Legally Purdy about some Canadian stuff. Locals, I'll do something exclusive later on today. And what else? I'm getting into the car to do a vlog about my Twitter space yesterday with a bunch of vax-pushing doctors who... Will, I did 2 hours on a Twitter space with a bunch. I mean, they're vax pushing doctors, and I was just doing my best to try to attack them on their own reasoning. And then at the end of it, I asked just 3 of them. I was like, "How many shots have you all had?" Like, just you're sitting here pushing this on everybody. One of them said 0. The other one refused to answer. And then after the space, another one of the doctors admits on Twitter he got myocarditis. I mean, it's clown world. It's a clown world. So I'm going to put together a short video to make sure everybody knows about what happened there. We'll stick around. Everybody out there, Rumble, peace out. Locals, peace out. And I will see you all probably this afternoon.